What is a boat doing in the middle of a desert? You would expect to find a seagoing vessel closer to shore. This is the question archaeologists had been asking for decades. In 1988, there was a storm near one of the most important archaeological sites in ancient Egypt. A wooden structure emerged from the sand. It was hollowed out by termites. Scientists were determined to solve its mystery. In 2000, they began excavating the site near Abydos, Ubidos. An American team of experts soon discovered a boat that was 70 feet long, and it wasn't alone. In total, there were 14 boats neatly resting next to each other. It was impossible to completely dig out the boats because of their poor condition. Luckily, the wood was preserved enough to get a sample. Analyses revealed that the boats were around 5,000 years old, the oldest fleet in human history to this date. The time of their construction predates the pyramids at Giza by half a millennium. Each ship of the fleet rested in a vault that matched its dimensions. The room was roughly a third of the size of a tennis court. It had mud brick walls that featured more than 120 drawings of boats. Ancient Egyptians incised them on whitewashed walls that were excellently preserved. Scientists have known about these mysterious chambers for well over a century. 1901, 1902. A British archaeologist, Arthur Weigel, stumbled upon a strange structure west of the River Nile. His team caught a glimpse of the interior walls. Sadly, a section of the roof collapsed, so they had to call off further exploration. Researchers abandoned the site, but its location remained on the maps. The boat's position first led scientists to think that they rested on a bank of the mighty Nile. But there was a problem with this theory. Today, the river flows almost 7 miles west of Abydos. Further studies of the surrounding terrain showed the Nile didn't change its course throughout history. Also, if the boats floated near a dock, they would be in unstable positions. The 14 vessels at Abydos were perfectly parallel to each other. There was only one conclusion possible. Someone had deliberately placed them like that. They must have gone through a lot of effort. Each boat had enough room for up to 30 rowers. These vessels could really float. They weren't models, but scholars still don't know if they actually sailed any body of water in ancient Egypt. This doesn't diminish the importance of the find. Previously, archaeologists found only small-scale models. In King Tut's tomb alone, there were 35 boat models. For a long time, these figurines were the only clues as to how ancient Egyptian vessels looked like. The boat's design confirms that they were the real deal. They are the earliest surviving examples of something called built boats. Ancient people constructed primitive vessels by hollowing out large tree trunks. The alternative was reed that was tied together to form a raft. The boats at Abydos had planks tied together. This was a major breakthrough in shipbuilding. During their lifetime, the boats must have seemed impressive. Timber was a valuable commodity at the time. There was no wood in the desert. Cedar had to be imported from Lebanon. The only person who could afford such luxury was the pharaoh. Studying the area around the ancient fleet provided more answers. Scientists discovered a mud brick structure where Egyptians worshipped the pharaoh. Its approximate date of construction matches that of the wooden boats. The same bricks out of which this building was made were used to encase the fleet. At the time of their construction, the rooms they were stored in had a ceiling. That's the section that archaeologists stumbled upon in the early 20th century. Just like mummies and coffins, these marvelous ships rested inside splendid vaults. The exterior of these rooms was also impressive. The outer walls originally had a plaster of white limestone. It reflected sunlight. In the desert sun, the structure housing the boats must have shone from miles away. Ancient Egyptian builders used the same technique to cover the pyramids 500 years later. Today, their surface looks jagged, but it wasn't always like this. When they were constructed, the pyramids had a top layer of fine white limestone. Their surface was smooth and it gleamed in the sunlight. Instead of stairs, the outer layer of the pyramids was more of a sleek ramp. Archaeologists were left with one final question. Which pharaoh owned the fleet? The answer lay just a mile from the site. This is where the tomb of a pharaoh from the 5th dynasty rested, King Senwosret III. Its time and style of construction matched the ones of the chambers with boats. The very end of his rule might explain how the boats ended up in the middle of the desert. The pharaoh probably passed away in northern Egypt. Then his body was transported down the Nile to Abydos in a marvelous procession of decorated boats. The vessels were later lowered to chambers near the final resting place of their owner. This had a symbolic meaning. In the ancient Egyptians' belief system, ships played a key role. Their supreme deity was Ra. He traveled through the sky during the day in the form of the sun. At nighttime, he sailed through the netherworld in a solar boat. The pharaoh identified himself with Ra. That's why he needed boats in the afterlife. That was the only way to regenerate himself. Just as the sun rises every day above the horizon. This belief existed for thousands of years. The more famous Pharaoh Khufu also had a ship. Scientists found it in 1954 next to his pyramid at Giza. It is some 4 centuries younger than the fleet at Abydos. But Khufu's ship was almost 2 times longer. The Great Pyramid of Giza and King Tut's tomb are some of the most famous archaeological finds in Egypt. But there are many more secrets hiding beneath the endless sands of the Sahara Desert. Recently, 2020, archaeologists found a lost city there. They have labeled it as the most important discovery since King Tut's tomb, 1922. The city of Aten is some 3,000 years old. Historians hope it will give them a unique insight into the everyday life of ancient Egyptians. The famous archaeologist and Egyptologist Zahi Hawass proclaimed the site a lost golden city. Aten sits some 300 miles south of Egypt's capital, Cairo. It is close to the famous Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists first found sections of mud brick walls that spread out in all directions. They discovered complete rooms with tools of everyday life inside. The research team unearthed a bakery, a residential neighborhood, and an administrative district. They all date back to the time when the Egyptian civilization was the wealthiest in its long history. They were also the first to make objects from iron. In 1911, scientists found a set of iron beads near a village in Lower Egypt, El Gurza. These are the earliest known iron artifacts. The discovery is literally out of this world. Ancient people made them by beating into shape a piece of a meteorite. The 9 beads were once part of an ornate necklace. They are now blackened and corroded, which is perfectly normal for a piece of jewelry that is over 5,000 years old. They consist of an iron-nickel alloy. Researchers were impressed by the skill of ancient jewelers who processed the beads. Their craftsmanship is more impressive when you think that they didn't know the stellar origins of the material. The Great Pyramid of Giza also has a remarkable feature. An international research group investigated the electromagnetic response of the structure to radio waves. They found that the pyramid has the ability to concentrate electromagnetic energy inside it. This occurred inside its chambers as well as under the pyramid's base. It contains an underground, unfinished chamber. It seems that the electromagnetic response is connected with the properties of limestone, the Great Pyramid's main building material. The research results might have a practical application. The way solar cells and nanosensors function could be improved by this remarkable find.
Most people know that pyramids were built as grand tombs for the pharaohs, designed to ensure they had a smooth journey to the afterlife. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was constructed for the pharaoh Khufu. But what most people don't know is that this whole pyramid building trend started right here with the step pyramid of Djoser about 4,700 years ago. This massive structure was built for Pharaoh Djoser, a ruler from Egypt's 3rd dynasty. It rises 7 layers high above the ground and stands about 200 feet tall. We think of it today as a phenomenal architectural project. But for ancient Egyptians, the step pyramid of Djoser turned out to be more like a massive experiment, a trial run, if you will, to perfect their building skills before they moved on to even more ambitious pyramids. Reaching new heights is super exciting, but the real mystery is what is going on below the ground. In this pyramid's underground labyrinth, there is a network of tunnels stretching about 3.5 miles long. And some researchers believe these tunnels might have been part of a sophisticated water system that could completely change what we think about pyramid construction. Let's talk about this massive complex located in Saqqara. Surrounding the pyramid, there's what's known as a dry moat, a continuous trench that is up to 164 feet wide and almost 2 miles long. It forms a sort of rectangular shape around the pyramid. This trench has an average depth of about 65 feet. Now, if you were to add up all the earth and rock they dug out to create this moat, It would be about 10 times the volume of the step pyramid itself. For the longest time, people just assumed this trench was nothing more than a huge quarry, a place where they dug up stone and clay to build the step pyramid. Makes sense, right? But when you take a closer look, it doesn't add up. The trench is too narrow and deep to be practical for mining, and its layout doesn't match anything we know about ancient Egyptian quarrying methods. Plus, some sections of the trench are actually covered with a rocky ceiling, which would have made it nearly impossible to use as a quarry. Another theory suggests that the dry moat had some kind of spiritual significance. Maybe it was a sacred place, where souls of nobles gathered to serve the late king in the afterlife. There are even niches in the walls that work as a hint at this spiritual function. But most researchers believe that this purpose likely developed much later, long after the complex was built for Djoser. So, what was the moat really designed for? In 2020, a researcher came up with a pretty intriguing idea. It is possible that this trench was actually designed to collect and manage water, especially after heavy rainfalls. Now, that makes sense when you consider the location. The moat sits in an area that could easily have been flooded by runoff water from nearby plains. This could also explain why the trench wasn't used for new graves until much later when the climate became drier and less prone to flooding. The story becomes even more intriguing as this trench appears to be part of a larger, more complex hydraulic system within the Djoser complex. It is like the trench has several compartments, carefully carved out of the rock and connected by tunnels. These compartments likely served as a part of a water treatment system, where water would flow from one compartment to the next, getting cleaner as it moved along. Now, here is where things start to tie into the pyramid itself. The Djoser complex has a series of underground shafts, and some researchers think that water from the moat's deep trench might have been used to power a hydraulic lift system, and this giant water-powered elevator could have been used to raise the heavy stones needed to build the pyramid. It worked like a volcano, but instead of lava, water did the heavy lifting. Imagine a big deep hole in the ground at the center of the pyramid site. Inside this hole, there was a huge wooden platform, kind of like a giant raft that could move up and down. When the workers wanted to lift a heavy stone, they would fill the hole with water. As the water rose, the wooden platform started to float up, carrying the stone with it, almost like a giant water-powered elevator. When the stone reached the right height, the workers slid it off the platform and onto the pyramid. The idea is that water from the deep trench, after being cleaned and filtered, would flow into these shafts. A massive float, possibly made of wood, would then rise as the water filled the shaft, lifting the stones up to where they were needed for construction. Once the stone was in place, they'd let the water out, lowering the platform back down to the bottom, ready to lift the next stone. This fancy hydraulic lift system could have been a game changer, making the whole building process a lot faster and more efficient without using a lot of workforce. It is like the ancient Egyptians were already embracing the whole idea of work smarter, not harder. But of course, not everyone is on board with this theory. Some experts argue that the area where the step pyramid of Djoser was built couldn't have held enough water from occasional rains to maintain such a fancy hydraulic system. The main theory suggests that, in the past, there might have been some kind of lake nearby that would have filled up after a period of rain, and this lake could have supplied water to the complex's hydraulic system. But there is no mention of such a lake in any ancient Egyptian writings, so it might be more of a what-if situation than a reality. And then there's the issue of the hard work itself. Remember when I said this method could have allowed the ancient builders to raise stones with far less effort? Well, that might not be entirely true. According to some experts, just building this hydraulic device would have required a lot more heavy work than simply moving the stone blocks using good old-fashioned manpower. And let's not forget, the step pyramid of Djoser is like a baby pyramid compared to those that came later. The stones used for Djoser's pyramid weighed, on average, about 660 pounds each, which is nothing compared to the more than 2.5-ton blocks used later for the Pyramid of Chephren. If this cool water lift theory gets completely ruled out, we still need to explain how this pyramid was built in the first place. To answer that, we need to rewind a bit and talk about the original plans. See, before Djoser's tomb became a pyramid, the idea was to construct a simple mastaba. This type of tomb was pretty common in earlier periods, a flat-roofed, rectangular structure with sloping sides. But after the original mastaba was finished, they decided to expand it a bit by adding more layers on top. And then they added even more layers, until the construction reached 6 distinctive steps, each one smaller than the previous. And they probably did all this by raising those heavy stones using ramps, not a water-powered elevator. There is still so much we don't know about the step pyramid of Djoser. More research is definitely needed to fully understand how this system worked, or if it even existed at all. But the idea of using water to help build the pyramid adds a whole new layer to our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering. It's a powerful reminder of just how clever and resourceful those builders were, using the natural landscape and the power of water to create one of the most iconic monuments in history. Now, have you ever seen cricket balls that are 3 billion years old? Klerksdorp spheres were found in deposits of the mineral pyrophyllite in South Africa and rock the science world. They do look like tiny ancient cricket balls with seams-like lines around the middle. Back in the 1980s, some folks claimed these spheres had been made by an advanced pre-flood civilization we know nothing about. One museum curator shared stories about how they rotated on their own in a display case. There was also a TV show that invited a psychic who declared the spheres were pieces of an ancient spaceship. But according to geologists, these spheres are actually pretty common concretions or spherical objects formed by different minerals than the surrounding rock. The seam-like lines are just imprints from the host rock's layers building up over time. The Klerksdorp spheres come in different shapes, from noticeably flattened spheres to distinct discs. As for that episode when one of these spheres spun on its own, the curator of the Klerksdorp Museum cleared that up too. He said that when he put one sphere on its glass shelf when a journalist came to visit, the sphere naturally rotated a bit because it's round. The area where the museum is located often experiences earth tremors from gold mining activities nearby. The oldest known human-like footprints could be 6 million years old. They were found on the Greek island of Crete in 2002. If the number is correct, it would mean that early human ancestors may have migrated between Europe and Africa much earlier than we previously thought. This doesn't mean Africa is not the cradle of humankind, though. It could just prove that early human ancestors moved back and forth between continents. Some researchers believe the footprints were left by a bipedal creature possibly related to an early human ancestor nicknamed El Greco. According to scientists who studied them, the footprints have a very human-like shape, with 5 toes and a parallel big toe. Some scientists are skeptical about it and suggest the prints might be from a late European ape. The new study analyzed fossilized marine microorganisms found in the sedimentary rocks to determine the footprint's age and prove it's actually 6 million years. The next amazing find that keeps scientists entertained is the Dorchester pot. It's a beautifully crafted metal vessel with some fancy geometric designs embossed in shiny silver. The pot was discovered in, who could have thought, Dorchester in 1852 under quite unusual circumstances. During a powerful blast, the pot broke into 2 pieces. Scientists believe it was originally embedded within a rock or boulder known as pudding stone. The rock from which the Dorchester pot emerged is dated to be around 500 million years old, so it could mean the pot itself is also that old. The current and less exciting theory suggests that the Dorchester pot is a Victorian-era candlestick holder. Such things were really trending back then, so it's not a surprise to find such fancy household item from that time. The Dorchester pot falls into the category of ooparts, or out-of-place artifacts. Those are objects that seem too advanced for the time period they're supposedly from. If we accept that the pot is 500 million years old, then whoever made it was way ahead of their times in terms of crafts and tech. One extra mystery is that the pot has an engraving of a plant that most likely disappeared from Earth over 100,000 years ago. Sounds like good proof the pot is really extra old. Now, it looks like the oldest map in Europe is a stone from 4,000 years ago. This Bronze Age slab was found in France in the year 1900 at an ancient burial ground. The carvings on the slab show in 3 dimensions the River Odde network with a fantastic accuracy of around 80% over an 18-mile stretch. There are other stone-carved maps around the world, but this one is unique because it shows a specific area to scale. Looks like the slab's carvings don't just map rivers and hills, but also settlements, barrow sites, and field systems. Archaeologists say the slab wasn't used for navigation, but rather to symbolize power. The detailed markings on the slab might have served to illustrate the domain of a local ruler, possibly a prince or king, to show their control over the territory. When the ruler lost power, the slab was likely repurposed as part of a burial vault. The unique artifact was stored in the cellar of a museum. For decades, no one even noticed until several scholars read older reports about the slab and decided to check it out. They conducted a detailed analysis using 3D techniques. Their research proved that the creators of the slab had not only etched lines into the rock, but also modified its surface to reflect the topography of the landscape with high accuracy. The Salzburg Cube, also known as the Wolf's Egg Iron, was discovered in the late 19th century in Austria. Now, don't let the name mislead you. It doesn't look like a cube at all. It's more like a rounded object with 2 flat sides. Down the middle, there's a groove, and the surface is covered with pits and craters. This unique appearance is the reason why many people think it might be something out of this world. Workers accidentally found this artifact when they blew apart a piece of coal. The coal seam it came from is thought to be over 60 million years old. The Salzburg Cube moved between museums, mysteriously vanished in the early 20th century, and then showed up again. A professor from Bonn University suggested it might be from a meteor, but they found no evidence of elements that you'd normally see in meteorites, like cobalt or nickel. Then researchers thought it must be a human-made object, possibly a Victorian-era candlestick holder. No one knows the true story of the cube or its current location. Yep, it disappeared again. Have you heard about the Meister print? It's a fossilized sandal print discovered in 1968, and it has sparked a lot of intrigue. There's a trilobite inside the print, which supposedly went extinct around 500 million years before humans even existed. But many historians think this age is an exaggeration. When Meister found the fossil, it was authenticated. But the scientist who did it didn't confirm it was a human sandal print. He only agreed there was a trilobite there. When another scientist visited the site, he found a 6-inch impression he believed was from a child's moccasin. But the footwear seemed to be new. So, could it be evidence of time travel? Proof that humans existed millions of years earlier than we thought? Or a sign that someone else visited early Earth? Or is it just a rock formation that looks like a sandal print? We still don't have the answers. Back in June 1936, a couple was walking along Red Creek in London, Texas. London, Texas? Yeah, when they stumbled upon something unusual. It was a piece of wood sticking out of what seemed to be an ancient rock formation. About 10 years later, their curious son decided to crack open the rock to see what was inside. And he saw a hammer, which looked surprisingly modern. Then, one unique finds enthusiast decided that the rock encasing the hammer was from the Cretaceous period. This would mean that someone dropped a 19th century hammer while dinosaurs like Triceratops were still roaming the earth. So, if this hammer was truly from the Cretaceous period, then the whole evolutionary theory would be wrong. And if the hammer was modern, it would mean the Cretaceous rock formation it came from was much younger than we thought. But the real answer was much simpler. The hammer was indeed modern, and geological processes had encased it in rock. Minerals can harden around an object in a relatively short time. So the hammer was probably dropped by a miner a century or so ago, and the rock formed around it afterward. And no, it wasn't a Victorian-era candlestick holder either.
The most exciting accidental discovery I've made in my life was a $10 bill in my old winter jacket. Some folks are luckier though, as they find underground cities from centuries ago or make inventions that turn them into millionaires. Velcro was invented after a routine walk in the woods. Kellogg's cornflakes were inspired by a chipped tooth, and Play-Doh saved a business empire from falling by chance. Back in 1998, electrical engineer John Williams found something that looked like an electrical plug sticking out of the ground. He started digging and noticed that it was stuck in a small rock. He found it in a rural location in North America, far from civilization, industrial complexes, airports, factories, and electronic plants. This piece of electronics embedded into a solid granite stone got the nickname Enigmalith and a price tag of $500,000. Some scientists are sure it's a big hoax and not a souvenir left by some visitors from space, as Williams claims. But the finder of the rock wanted to prove that it was a real piece of ancient technology, some sort of an electrical connector. If it's not a hoax, then this little find could be proof that humans, or some other civilization from the past, were way more advanced than we ever thought. They must have managed to invent a way to transmit electricity long before humans in the 19th century. He offered scientists to take a look at this find and establish what it really is without breaking the rock open, but there were no takers. Williams consulted an engineer and a geologist, and both confirmed there were no traces of glue on the electronic component. It hasn't been welded either, so it must be as old as the rock, which is around 100,000 years old, according to geological analysis. Dr. John Kellogg had a philosophy of biological living with regular exercise, massage, plenty of water, zero bad habits, caffeine, and no meat. At the end of the 19th century, he looked over a health institute in Michigan. He once whipped up a mix of flour, oats, and cornmeal. He thought that by baking whole grains at high temps, they'd be easier on the stomach and healthier overall. He baked the mix twice and first made cookies, but a patient chipped a tooth on that version. Then he decided to break it into small pieces. It's hard to pinpoint exactly how Kellogg cornflakes came to be, with so many versions of the story floating around. Kellogg's wife, Ella, and his brother Will both claimed they played a role in creating the flakes, along with several other family members and sanitarium staff. The company lore says that it all went down one night in 1898, when some wheat-based cereal dough was left out too long, fermenting in the process. When rolled out thin, the slightly moldy dough turned into these perfect large thin flakes that got all crispy and yummy in the oven. Over the next few years, Will Kellogg kept tweaking the recipe and realized that corn, not wheat, made even crunchier, tastier flakes. His brand, Kellogg's Corn Flakes, has grown into a multi-billion-dollar company. Swiss engineer George de Mestral once went for a walk with his dog and came back with a concept that would later go to space. Once they got back from the woods, de Mestral noticed that his pants and his dog's fur were covered in the tiny barbs of the cocklebur plant. He examined the burrs under the microscope and noticed that they were shaped like tiny hooks that stuck to loops on clothes and fur. He decided to recreate that natural tech to design an extra strong fastener, one with many practical uses. He was testing different materials for his invention for so many years and finally settled on nylon. He also needed to design a special type of loom that could weave the fibers in the right size, shape, and density. It took de Mestral a total of 14 years until he introduced the world to Velcro, which means velvet and hook in French. De Mestral was hoping his invention would replace the zipper on clothes, but the fashion world found Velcro cheap-looking and unattractive. But NASA didn't think so, and used Velcro for astronaut spacesuits and helmets in the 1960s. Now, Velcro is used everywhere, from footwear to toys to airline seat cushions. Before the middle of the 20th century, most homes were heated with coal. It left soot throughout the house, which was especially visible on wallpapers. Kutal Products was the largest company that sold wallpaper cleaner, but in the 50s, more and more people switched to gas, oil, and electricity, and the sooty buildup problem was mostly solved. The owner of Kutal Products was trying to save his business. Meanwhile, His sister-in-law read that wallpaper cleaner could be used to make holiday decorations. She worked as a nursery school teacher, and modeling clay was pretty hard for her students to handle, so she decided to test this material for molding into different shapes, and it works out just fine. She told her relatives about the discovery and suggested a name for it: Play-Doh. The Kudal company was about to go bankrupt, so it was a great alternative for a new business. Soon enough, Macy's and Marshall Field got interested in the new toy and started selling it. Play-Doh was originally only in one color, white, but soon expanded to red, blue, and yellow. They also made several changes to the original recipe, but the mixture is still mostly the same as when it was used to clean wallpapers. An urban legend says that if you take all the Play-Doh compound ever made and put it through their Fun Factory playset, you'll get a snake that will wrap around the planet 300 times. A man in Turkey was renovating his home when he knocked down a wall in his basement with a sledgehammer. He found a tunnel behind the wall that led to an ancient underground city. The tunnel led to more tunnels and then halls and chambers. It turned out to be a whole underground complex with 18 stories and without a single inhabitant, abandoned a long time ago. It was the city of Derinkuyu, built thousands of years ago, a home for up to 20,000 people. Whoever built it had great skill, and it's rather easy to build tunnels out of the soft rock, but cave-ins are a big risk. None of the floors at Derinkuyu have ever collapsed. The city had a complex ventilation system with over 15,000 shafts. The upper levels had the best ventilation and were used for living and sleeping quarters. The lower levels were mainly used for storage, but they also had a dungeon. In between, there were room for domestic animals, a school, a convent, and small churches. John Martin, a forestry professor, was out exploring a forest in Wisconsin one night. He was shining a UV flashlight up into the canopy to spot lichens, fungi, plants, and frogs that glow under the UV light. Then suddenly, he heard a flying squirrel chirping at a bird feeder, pointed the flashlight at it, and saw it light up pink. The professor told his colleagues about it, and they decided to investigate further. They checked out some flying squirrel skins at museums to see if this pink glow is a common thing among them. It turns out that almost all of the flying squirrel specimens they looked at had the same pink fluorescence. Non-flying squirrels didn't glow at all. Other animals with fluorescence, like puffins and chameleons, glow blue under UV light. The only other mammals with fluorescent fur are around 20 species of opossum. They live in different ecosystems and have different diets. The only thing they have in common with flying squirrels is that they're all active at night. And regular squirrels prefer sunlight. There's enough ultraviolet light in low-light conditions, and nocturnal animals need UV vision. So the pink glow might have to do with nighttime perception and navigation, especially in cold and snowy conditions. Or it could be a way for male flying squirrels to attract prospective mates. It could be a sort of mimicry.
A piece of whale rib has recently been found in a North Carolina mine. Not a big deal, some might think. Hey, why can't a whale be a miner, right? But this fragment offers scientists a unique glimpse at the interactions between prehistoric sharks and whales from around 3 to 4 million years ago. The thing is, 3 tooth marks embellish the rib. That means that the whale was once badly bitten by an animal with a super powerful jaw. Judging by the spacing between the tooth marks, and it reaches almost 2.5 inches. This animal could be a mega-toothed shark. I'm talking about the megalodon. Or it could be a different shark species which was around at that time. The curvature of the shark's jaw shows that the animal was relatively small, between 13 and 20 feet long. Yeah, small. As for the whale, it seems to be the ancestor of a great blue or humpback whale. Researchers are amazed. You don't usually expect to find evidence of animal interaction and behavior preserved in the fossil record. After examining the sample carefully, they concluded that the shark must have gone away with a mouthful, but the whale had survived because most of the fossil fragment is covered with what is known as woven bone. It quickly forms in response to localized infection. Such bone isn't particularly strong, and later the body remodels it into compact bone tissue. But it takes time. The presence of this bone means that the healing was incomplete and the whale passed away 2 to 6 weeks after the unfortunate encounter. On the other hand, its demise could have been unrelated to the infection and injury. Only a handful of fossils show such kinds of interactions between ancient animals. You can often find bite marks on fossils indicating where the animal passed away and its carcass was scavenged. But this fossil is one of a few examples that not only show a wound inflicted by another animal, but also demonstrate that the prey survived. All fossils are exciting for paleontologists. Yes, they need to get out more. But some might look terrifying to regular people. For example, look at this picture of tentacle arms and octagonal-shaped heads. When it first appeared in mass media, internet users claimed that it was some ancient organism that had come from space. Others thought the story was fake. But in fact, both the picture and the fossil are real. The fossil is known as a mortality plate, a fossilized representation of a mass extinction event of one or several species. The fossil actually contains more than a dozen specimens of a type of marine organism called a crinoid. Despite their looks, crinoids were not plants but marine animals. This particular species lived deep underwater on the seafloor. Crinoids were related to starfish, sea urchins, and brittle stars. These creatures could attach themselves to the seafloor with stalks made up of flexible porous discs connected by soft tissue. The stalks were hollow, and that's where the animal's nervous system was located. Crinoids absorbed oxygen through thin-walled tube feet. The creatures usually reached the length of more than 8 inches and had 5 arms lined with leathery-looking, tentacle-like structures. They fed on plankton and sloughed off organic material. Now, even though these fossil finds seem to be super exciting, few creatures in the fossil record confuse scientists as much as the Tully monster. This curious sea creature sported a toothy, trunk-like snout and eyes splayed out on a rigid rod. But the most bizarre thing? It has been impossible to classify. Researchers have been considering a variety of organisms, for example, segmented worms, swimming slugs, and primitive eel-like creatures, since the monster was discovered in 1966. Recently, they have even tried to connect it to some species of jawless fish with a backbone-like structure. A team of scientists from Japan has used high-resolution laser scanners to examine the anatomy of Tully monster fossils in 3D. They concluded that the enigmatic fossil might be an invertebrate after all, and still, the true identity of the creature remains elusive. In the 1950s, amateur fossil hunter Francis Tully found a ghostly imprint of a torpedo-shaped organism with a huge tail fin in the Mizon Creek fossil beds in Illinois. Tully had never seen anything similar to the torpedo structure. He took his find to Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History. Paleontologists working there were baffled as well. Since then, scientists haven't been able to determine where the creature fits on the phylogenetic family tree, or where they should spend Thanksgiving. In 1741, an explorer and captain named Vitus Johansen Bering led an expedition to map the coast of Alaska. The ship he was on got shipwrecked on what later became known as Bering Island, and they got hungry. Half the crew survived thanks to the discovery of an extremely large sea cow. With the meat of these animals nourishing them, the sailors managed to build a small ship from the wreckage and return home. On their way back, a scientist who was among them spent his time documenting the animals and plants they had found. The sea cow was particularly interesting because without it, the crew wouldn't have survived. These animals were more than 26 feet long and weighed around 10 tons. All sea cows are members of the order Sirenia, marine mammals more closely related to elephants than cows. The scientists described them as having black skin, a small head, and stubby forelimbs. Those sea cows floated on the water's surface, munching on kelp. After the information about these animals became widespread, sea otter fur trading expeditions made use of that convenient depot en route. Sea cows were docile and could be easily hunted. Long story short, within 27 years after the scientists mentioned those animals, they were driven to extinction. But it's not the saddest part. The fossil record reveals a much deeper and darker history. Fossils of sea cows have been discovered all over the world, from Japan to Mexico. It means that the animal once thrived in the vast kelp beds around the entire North Pacific Rim. That small population discovered by the expedition was probably the last remains of a once much larger and way healthier population. More likely, Aboriginal hunting had already reduced the numbers of these animals to near extinction levels, and the final blow came from Western hunters. The living close relatives of those ancient sea cows are rarely hunted today. Still, they're under threat of extinction themselves. To some, this amazing fossil might look a bit disturbing. Slaves' lentils are fossils that belong to animals called nummelites. They lived and thrived in a warm, shallow sea covering part of Egypt around 40 million years ago. The name nummelites hints at the fact that larger specimens resemble coins, and in Egyptian folklore, they're even referred to as angel's money. These creatures have a simple, single-celled structure, which contrasts with their super intricate skeleton. Look at this series of spiral overlapping whorls. Each whorl is divided into countless tiny chambers. Nummelites can grow to be 4 inches in diameter, and still, they are the fossils of single-celled animals related to amoeba. How and why did they grow to be so large? The reason could be their symbiotic relationships with other smaller organisms. In the case of modern species, such symbionts are tiny golden-brown single-celled algae called diatoms. The shells of nummelites are relatively transparent, and since they're flat, there's a large surface area for the light needed for the diatoms to photosynthesize. For some reasons, scientists are still debating about them. The presence of plant symbionts in animals dwelling in the sea encourages the growth of a calcareous skeleton in hosts. So, the gigantic size of the nummelites in Egypt could be due to their close relationship with symbiotic diatoms. Does that make sense? Fun fact: a species of nummelites evolve very fast, and their fossils change from one layer of sediments to the next. So, the limestone used for the pyramids of Giza are so packed with such fossils that it's known as nummelitic limestone. This limestone also contains 2 kinds of nummelites, the smaller slave's lentils and the larger angel's money. But those are not different species, but rather different stages in the life cycle of a single species. So, if you still haven't made your fortune, don't be too sad. There are huge amounts of money out there longing to be discovered. Look at this humble Chinese villager. At 51 years old, he accidentally made 4 million won, which is over $600,000, without doing anything special. The thing is, he and his son just found it in a pig while doing their basic chores they would do every single day. The stone they found inside the pig is called bezor, and I bet you've never heard of it before. It's not common in the West, but it's a big deal in traditional Chinese medicine. If you look at this stone, you may think it's ew. This 4-inch long, 2.7-inch wide treasure is hairy and looks a bit gross at first glance, and it doesn't get better. After discovering the stone, the father and the son took it to Shanghai for an appraisal, and it cost them around $6,000. But still, the initial expenses don't seem so big, considering they're a mere 1% of what that stone is worth. Now, not everything in an animal's belly is going to make you rich. Only the gallbladder stuff is real gold. I know that women can buy themselves flowers and write their names in the sand, but let's face it, women just love it when we offer them fancy bouquets. Still, today, it's much easier to do than it was in the 17th century. Back then, an average Joe would have to slave his way to afford just one flower. Somewhere around the 1630s, there was a tulip mania, where tulip bulbs cost more than gold. Okay, the price wasn't real. It was a speculative bubble way before all the other economic drama we see today. We just haven't learned our lesson yet. Back at that time, a single tulip bulb was sold for more than what a skilled artisan made in an entire year. And it wasn't just any tulip bulb. We're talking about bulbs with fancy colors and patterns that were rare and sought after. The tulip market was like the stock market at the time, with traders making deals in taverns and signing contracts with each other. It was all about supply and demand. And just like with any bubble, prices eventually crashed in February 1637, leaving everyone with empty pockets, scratching their heads, and feeling ill. Meanwhile, speaking of feeling under the weather, back in 15th century Europe, people turned to Egyptian mummies for relief from headaches, stomach issues, and even more serious conditions modern medicine still can't beat today. Embalmed bodies were thought to have some magical healing powers. But why did folks eat mummies in the first place? Well, it all started with a mix-up in translations. There was a substance called mumia that was considered super valuable for its healing properties. But when Western Europeans got wind of it through letters from other nations, they mistakenly thought it came from Egyptian mummies. This led to a whole fashion of medical mummy eating. People believed that consuming parts of mummies could cure all sorts of ailments. So they started raiding Egyptian tombs and selling mummies like hotcakes. Demand was so high that some shady characters even started making fake mummies out of… Trust me, you don't want to know it. I'll leave it to your imagination. But you can write your ideas in the comments. Fast forward to the Victorian era, and the enthusiasm with mummies was at an all-time high. Egyptomania was in full swing, with mummy unwrapping parties becoming a popular pastime. It wasn't until the late 19th century that the use of mumia finally fizzled out. One day, a dead sperm whale washed up on a beach in La Palma, Spain, and a professor was sent on a mission to crack the case of the animal's demise. Amidst crashing waves and the massive carcass, he stumbled upon a surprising revelation: a hefty 21-pound stone stuck at its intestines. But this was no ordinary rock. Valued at 500,000 euros, which is over $545,000, it turned out to be ambergris, also known as floating gold. Legend has it that this funky substance can be found floating in the sea or rarely washed up on beaches. It was discovered in the 1800s. It's actually formed from the indigestible bits sperm whales gobble up while feasting on squid, like their beaks. Over time, perhaps years, these bits clump together in their intestines, almost like a kidney stone, to create this valuable lump of ambergris. Now, you may ask yourself why a sperm whale's excretion costs way more than your house. But the answer is simple. It just smells good. Okay, it's not good. It smells divine. The aroma ranges from sweet to musky tones, and perfume makers go bananas for this stuff as it helps fragrances last longer. The more a substance called amberin it contains, the pricier it gets. And the color matters too. Black means less amberin, while white packs a punch. Cheaper options opt for synthetic alternatives, but top-notch perfumes go for the real deal. While using ambergris in perfumes is a no-go in the US, the French still adore this magical ingredient. By the way, over $500,000 is not a limit here. Some lucky fishers once scored a chunk of ambergris worth $1.5 million in the Gulf of Aden. Those sperm whales sure have some fancy intestines, huh? Now, next time you go grocery shopping, do not complain about prices, okay? At least you can easily afford any spice out there. Your many times great-grandfather somewhere in the Middle Ages wouldn't believe you that cinnamon and black pepper can be that affordable. Spices were worth their weight in gold and gems, driving the economy like nobody's business. Back in the day, food went bad faster than milk in the sun, so spices were a hot commodity to cover up that not-so-fresh flavor. European nations wanted to control the spice trade, which led to crazy expeditions to India and other Asian lands. The Portuguese, Dutch, French, Spanish, and English were all fighting for spice domination, setting up shop and making a mint along the way. Now, on to the exact prices. Back in 1393, saffron was as pricey as a horse, ginger as much as a sheep, and mace as costly as a cow. And a pound of nutmeg was worth 7 fat oxen in medieval Germany. That black pepper that we take for granted today wasn't just for seasoning. Peppercorns were actually used as currency in Europe. Towns kept their books in pepper. Brides got pepper as part of their dowry, and some landlords even accepted peppercorn rent. May I cover my utility bills this month with this fancy packet of cinnamon, sir? No? What? You think I should go out and get an actual job? Okay. Hey, that's a nice t-shirt, but does it come in purple? What? It'll cost 10 times more in this color? Now, this one may sound insane to modern people spoiled by the variety we've got today, but if the shopping malls we know today existed many centuries ago, that would be a common thing. Making Tyrian purple dye was such a chore that it cost a pretty penny. It's rumored that purple dye was as valuable as silver. This led to purple fabrics becoming symbols of status, with fancy laws dictating who could wear them. Big-shot Roman leaders flaunted their importance by wearing white togas trimmed in Tyrian purple, while victorious generals rocked the grandest toga of them all, solid purple with shiny gold embellishments. Fast forward to the 4th century, and it was basically illegal for anyone in Rome to sport Tyrian purple except for the emperor. That's how exclusive it was. In fact, saying someone donned the purple came to mean they became emperor. The Byzantine Empire took tight control over Tyrian purple production, using it solely for their fancy silk fabrics. Fun fact, if a royal kid was born, they were literally born in the purple. But I digress. Tyrian purple may have been worn by the nobility, but the origins of this fancy dye are far from being noble. It came from the slimy stuff of 3 different sea snails. Each snail made a unique hue. One of them gave us a bluish purple, another one rocked a reddish purple, and there was even a snail that could help make a vibrant red dye.
People went outside and stopped in wonder. Some gooey stuff was covering the ground. Whitish, gelatinous blobs had turned the outside world into a scene out of a creepy sci-fi movie. This mystery evoked lots of discussion, and experts offered different theories. But it turned out that the situation was even worse than previously thought. The blobs reportedly made the people who came into contact with them sick. But let's start from the very beginning. It was the summer of 1994 in the timber town of Oakville, when gelatinous blobs were found on the ground. People thought they had rained from the sky because where else could they have come from? This find caused panic and confusion among the residents of the area. But actually, it was just the first appearance of this gooey substance. Flecks of goo, which were actually smaller than a grain of rice, fell down from the sky several times. The volume was very high, and when they accumulated on the ground and shed roofs, they became visible. Around 10 days after the first occurrence, a newspaper wrote an article about the blobs. Other than that, there seemed to be no other confirmed and official reports about this mysterious substance. Until a National Weather Service employee in the area got a call from an unidentified man in August. The man claimed that some hot, metallic particles falling from the sky had burned holes in his kid's trampoline. Apparently, it was time to examine the Oakville blobs. A hospital reportedly looked at them under a microscope and made a terrifying discovery. The researchers stated that the substance contained human white cells. This encouraged some people to suppose that the blobs were probably concentrated fluid waste from an airplane toilet. This theory was debunked after a spokesperson of the Federal Aviation Administration explained that toilet fluids were usually dyed blue, which gave them the nickname blue ice. Another theory trying to explain the Oakville blobs suggested they had something to do with jellyfish. Some experts agreed that this idea was plausible. Something the size of portions of jellyfish could have been pulled up into the atmosphere and moved to another location during a storm. After all, raining animals is nothing new, but we'll speak about that later. At the same time, 6 events of the Oakville blobs raining down from the sky were reported, which made it hard to imagine jellyfish particles floating around in the sky for so long. On the 20th of August 1994, the New York Times reported that the mysterious gooey substance had once been alive. This article followed an analysis made by the Washington State Department of Ecology. The scientists who had tested the blobs announced that they had found out that the substance contained a number of cells of different sizes. Interestingly, those results brought an end to the human white cell theory since it turned out that the cells didn't have any nuclei. But that's something you definitely see in human white cells and jellyfish as well. These creatures are multicellular organisms whose cells contain nuclei. But what kind of life wouldn't have nuclei? For example, bacteria and some other microorganisms similar to them. An expert working on this mystery said that the blobs had no clearly visible structure, and it didn't appear even when they used a microscope. In the end, the researchers concluded that the substance contained 2 types of bacteria, both found in the digestive tracts of humans and other mammals. They were also often found when waste was deposited. These bacteria could travel in the water and through the air. The goo could be some kind of a carrier system. Unfortunately, the scientists admitted that they didn't have any hard evidence to support their idea. To add to the mystery, the samples reportedly went missing before the researchers could finish their work. But is it true that the weird blobs made people sick? At first sight, yes. A few Oakville residents reported becoming ill and experiencing similar flu-like symptoms after touching the Oakville blobs. But was it a direct consequence? No one knows. Experts admit that the cases of illness could have been a coincidence, which makes the incident even more intriguing. So far, the mystery remains unsolved. Now let's move on to the other stuff falling from the sky. Bad news. Some of it can be totally disgusting. Like worms falling from the sky in China and wiggling on people's cars. Some people thought it was an animal rain, while others were not convinced. They stated that the video was fake since the worms were only on vehicles but not on the ground. Others were sure worm rains were a totally normal thing in March. Ugh, luckily not where I live. But the most shocking thing? Bizarre worm rains happened in the British Isles too. For example, in Scotland, kids were playing soccer when worms started raining down. The reason could be a substantial weather change, or who knows what. But the cases of animal rain actually started long ago. In 1877, an unusual tornado hit a farm in Southern California, bringing along several tiny alligators about 1 foot in length. In 1894, a tornado moved through England, dropping poisonous jellyfish on people's heads. Even though some witnesses claimed those were not jellyfish but tadpoles, the incident was still extremely strange. In 1876, in Kentucky, black humor rain was recorded. That was when chunks of meat fell from the sky. Now, let me tell you, if you're squeamish, you might want to skip this part. Okay, I've warned you. Locals claimed the meat tasted like mutton, but later, researchers discovered that buzzards flying over the area must have felt unwell and regurgitated their meal right in the air. Ew, told ya. All these are instances of the animal rain, a rare meteorological phenomenon in which flightless animals fall from the sky. Such cases have been reported throughout history, starting from 1794, when French soldiers saw toads fall to the ground during heavy rain near the French city of Lille. How do such rains occur? It might be different for different species. For example, frogs and toads often roam the countryside in large numbers. Powerful winds can pick them up and carry them for great distances. Or let's take fish. In 1861, there was a reported rain of fish in Singapore. And a naturalist speculated at that time a migration of walking catfish could be taking place. So the wind might have dragged them over land from one puddle to another, as if they had been following the rain. In any case, the most common explanation of such cases is that there is no actual falling at all. Animals are just driven along by winds or something of the kind. This can also explain why typically only one single species of animal is reported raining from the sky. Another probable explanation involves tornado waterspouts. Those are tornadoes forming over the water. A tornadic waterspout can potentially transport animals to relatively high altitudes and carry them to remote locations. This idea is supported by the suggestion that animal rains are often preceded by storms. At the same time, this theory doesn't explain why each incident involves just one species, not a group of similarly sized animals from the same habitat. Here are some other examples of animal rains. In 1947, fish started falling to the ground in Louisiana. And in 2005, it rained frogs in Serbia. In 2010, a small town in Australia experienced a rain of perches. These occurrences were most likely caused by tornadoes, lifting things from the ground and water and depositing them in totally different areas. Sometimes, even iguanas might fall onto your head. When it's really cold, they go into hibernation mode to survive. But even though they might look frozen, they're still alive. When it gets warmer, they start moving again. But unfortunately, while in that chilled state, they might fall down from trees, which is dangerous both for the animals themselves and for passers-by. There are tons of weird things on Mars. Spoons, noodles, doors, even faces. Are they all really just rocks? Besides, it's not the only planet in our solar system full of mysterious things. Let's check them out. Recently, we found a strange thing on Mars that looks like a smooth, spoon-like object. It grabbed everyone's attention after NASA's Curiosity rover spotted it. The rock, with a handle and rounded tip, looks like it's floating in the rover's photo. People on the internet are puzzled about what it might be. Some are joking that it's a Martian's bowling pin, or even a shoehorn left by extraterrestrial creatures. But Andrew Good from NASA says it's not that exciting. Turns out it's just a rock shaped by the wind over a long time. These kinds of rocks with odd shapes are common on Mars. They're called ventifacts. Ventifact is a rock that can get scratched, dented, or smoothed out by tiny particles carried by the wind. You'll usually find these kinds of rocks in dry places where there's not much grass or trees to block the wind, and where there's a lot of sand blowing around. Sometimes, the wind can carve ventifacts into really cool shapes, like the mushroom rocks you can see in the White Desert National Park in Egypt. These rocks look like giant mushrooms because the wind wears away the bottom part faster than the top, making them stand tall and slim. Ventifacts aren't the only cool Martian rocks. Check out this series of surreal spikes protruding from the red surface. NASA's Curiosity rover stumbled upon them while exploring the Gale crater on Mars. They quickly caught everyone's attention. Twisting structures resembling spikes looked like some extraterrestrial doors. Even the SETI Institute, an organization focused on searching for extraterrestrial life, tweeted about the image, referring to it as a cool rock. But in reality, these are just hoodoos. These tall and thin spires occur when hard rock sits atop softer rock layers. Martian spikes are likely cemented fillings of ancient fractures in sedimentary rock, with softer material eroded away over time. Again, there are many hoodoos on Earth too. They're also called fairy chimneys or tent rocks. You can find them in places like Utah's Bryce Canyon and the Colorado Plateau. NASA is excited about these weird structures because they can help us learn more about the history of the Gale crater. There was also a rock that looked like a jelly donut. We called this rock Pinnacle Island. It was spotted by NASA's cameras. However, just 4 days earlier, it was nowhere to be seen. So how did it magically disappear? In a very anticlimactic way, it was kicked up by one of Opportunity's wheels as it traversed the Martian terrain. But there's still some mystery surrounding that jelly donut. Analysis revealed that Pinnacle Island contains unusually high levels of sulfur and manganese. Both of these things are water-soluble. In other words, there might have been some water action that created these elements in the rock. So this tiny thing suddenly caused a lot of drama, and an entire lawsuit against NASA. It claimed that the agency failed to investigate a possible fungus growing on Mars. Jelly donut fungus. But not all our findings are natural. Another puzzling discovery was this thing the Perseverance rover spotted. It's something that looks like tangled spaghetti or string. Just like the donut, this mysterious object showed up in a rover camera image and then vanished from the sandy ground in several days. It turns out that it could be debris from the rover's landing system. Perseverance landed in the Jezero crater in February 2021. It had a rough landing and accidentally scattered debris around. Some of these debris pieces have been showing up in the rover's images for a while now. The string-like object is likely a piece of shredded Dacron netting, which is a type of fiber used in thermal blankets. These blankets help regulate equipment temperatures during the super hot process of landing on Mars. It probably underwent significant unraveling and shredding due to strong forces during the landing. Thermal blankets lost a bunch of stuff back then. For example, this shiny foil piece spotted in June. The rover found it on a rock. What's remarkable is how far some of the debris has traveled. The rover landed about 1.2 miles away from where it's currently exploring. It's probably because the crash threw the debris into the air, and the Martian winds carried it over such a distance. Mars is known for its strong winds, which can move lightweight objects. However, while it's fun to stumble upon them on images, there are concerns about the debris and trash on Mars. We haven't even fixed this problem on Earth, and we're already creating it on Mars. The debris we left on the red planet is already accumulating in an area called Hogwallow Flats. Plus, the debris can accidentally contaminate the sample tubes used for collecting Martian rocks. So far, NASA isn't overly worried about this, but they're keeping a close eye on it to prevent any issues with the rovers. Now, how about not things, but animals? Curiosity caused quite a stir when it captured something that looked like a rat on Mars. Some started speculating that it could be evidence of indigenous Martian life, or even that this rodent was brought along by Curiosity. But the Mars rat, once again, turned out to be just a weird rock. It looked interesting because of the natural processes like wind erosion and mechanical abrasion. We also found some worm-looking things. Curiosity snapped a picture of a formation that looks like worms wriggling across the Martian landscape. Despite its tiny size, this formation stands out with its unique shape and rough texture. It's probably made of durable material resistant to Mars's harsh erosion. And finally, our top mysterious finding is the face on Mars. Cydonia is a region on Mars that has captured both scientific and popular interest. It's located in Mars's northern hemisphere. It lies between heavily cratered regions to the south and relatively smooth plains to the north. There's a theory that the northern plains may have once been ocean beds. Maybe Cydonia was once a coastal zone. This place is full of interesting and beautiful features that tell us a lot about the history of the Red Planet. But its most interesting feature was the Martian face. This thing gained widespread attention when it was snapped by the Viking 1 orbiter in 1976. Some believed that it was evidence of a long-lost Martian civilization. At first, NASA dismissed it as a trick of light and shadow. But after some analysis, it turned out to be, yep, another rock. We also saw a face of a bear. It was captured by the high-resolution imaging experiment camera. In an image, we can see a circular fracture pattern that looks like a bear's head, with two craters forming the eyes and a V-shaped collapse structure like the nose. The head likely formed because something heavy settled on top of an old hole in the ground. This hole was filled with either lava or mud. The nose-like feature is speculated to be a volcanic or mud vent. But why do we keep seeing these strange things on Mars? Sometimes our brains can trick us into seeing things like faces or objects in rocks and other things. But these are just illusions called pareidolia. Pareidolia is a psychological phenomenon that makes us see familiar patterns or shapes, especially faces, where none actually exist. It's because the brain encounters something it doesn't recognize or understand right away. It tries to find things that look the most like this one. So it sees random patterns, textures, or sounds as something meaningful and recognizable. That's why a chair and clothes on it seems like a super creepy human-like figure at night. It also causes you to see faces or shapes in clouds, or hear recognizable sounds and even words in random noise. It's a fascinating proof of the power of our perception, but we also should be careful with it and not let our imagination run wild.
Summers in the Middle East get so hot that they change the landscape dramatically and make entire cities resurface from the past. That's what happened in 2018 when the city, built by a mysterious empire on the Tigris River, was finally released from its water trap. Archaeologists rushed to the location as they didn't want to miss a rare chance to excavate the site and learn more about the history of the place. They believe they've found the Bronze Age city Zakiku, founded over 3,000 years ago and fully submerged in the 1980s when a dam was built in its place. It used to be a busy hub for the Mitanni Empire for caravans on the popular trade route. It had water, which is a rarity in the area, and it was a guarantee for success. We know very little about the once powerful empire, as scientists haven't found any written chronicles in the excavated sites. That's why the archaeologists were thrilled to find an entire palace for the local ruler. Several years later, when the area became free from the water again, they found some fortifications to protect the city from foes. The highlight of their expedition was finding a huge public storehouse for trade goods and harvests, piles of wheat and barley, and imported metal and wood. Bread was the staple food for the locals, and they also loved big pots of vegetable soups and stews for lunch. Each household kept sheep, goats, cows, and pigs, so they had a steady source of milk and meat for special occasions. All the constructions found so far were built from bricks molded from mud. The walls that were underwater for over 40 years are so well preserved as if they went down yesterday. The royal palace stands out as it's larger than the other constructions, has thicker walls, and even pavements made of baked mud bricks that were sealed to be waterproof. The local king must have been in good relations with the emperor of the larger empire, of which Akiku was dependent. Traders who lived in the city collected wooden beams and took them to storehouses. The beams arrived down the Tigris River from the forests in the mountains in the north and east of Mesopotamia. Merchants came here to sell their goods, and then crossed the Tigris on their way to the borderlands. Zakiku was thriving as a center of commerce for about 6 centuries, until it was hit by a massive earthquake in 1350. Archaeologists found 5 ceramic vessels holding over 100 clay tablets made close after the earthquake. It's almost a miracle that small tablets of unfired clay managed to survive underwater for decades. People who created those must have carved notes on clay while it was still wet. They wrote about anything, from newly stored harvests to notes for other kingdoms. Then they would let the message dry in the sun. Scribes even had to learn a different language so that everyone outside the city could read it. Scientists believe the tablets they found used to be part of a private archive. They hope to decipher the notes to learn more about the history of Zakiku and the whole empire after the terrible earthquake. The damage to the buildings was so enormous that it was impossible to restore Zakiku to its former glory, and if there had been any survivors, they must have left the city. Several decades later, the Assyrians, who also lived in Mesopotamia, settled here. They built their houses on the ruins of the abandoned city and used whatever structures they could find from the previous residents as outer walls. But they stayed here only for 50 years, then decided to build a new capital on more fertile soil to make some good cash from agriculture. Archaeologists working in Zakiku had to halt excavations when the water levels went back up and covered the city. They sealed the ruins in tight-fitting plastic sheets and put stones and gravel on top. They hope it will help protect the priceless site from water erosion and prevent it from disappearing again. They realize how important water from the dam is for the region, but if it recedes again, they say they'll definitely continue the excavations. There was a bustling community in today's Taklamakan Desert in China around 1,600 years ago. It lived along the Nile River, which ran through the desert for miles and got its water from the melting snow in the mountains. After 3 years of work in the area, archaeologists and scientists managed to dig up 8 tombs in the desert. Thanks to the desert heat, the clothes and artifacts inside them were almost as good as new. The people who wore those must have lived in the ancient city of Naya. Naya used to be part of a prosperous kingdom at the heart of the Silk Road trading route and had a population of over 3,000 people. Then, desert sands went rogue and swallowed the city whole. Archaeologists only found the ruins of Nija in the early 20th century. Scientists from different countries have tried to solve its mysteries. It looks like the tombs discovered at the end of the 20th century belonged to the wealthy. There were some expensive items inside: a quiver and bow, metal arrowheads, gold earrings, and a glass bead necklace, a lacquer box with a comb, makeup, and a sewing kit in one of the tombs. There was also some silk of top quality, and even the bright colors like green and yellow haven't faded on it. The fabric also had Chinese characters with quotes from historical books, which helped scientists identify the period in which it was made. Archaeologists later found a large dwelling site and the clearing of 3 ruined buildings. It will probably take many more years to understand why the city had fallen and what happened to its people. Saudi and French archaeologists teamed up near Riyadh, the Saudi Arabian capital, and stumbled upon an ancient settlement dating back 8,000 years. The scientists used all sorts of cool tech, like laser scanning, drones, and aerial photography, to unearth this Neolithic-era gem. They found the settlement in a local archaeological hotspot. Among the treasures they uncovered were a stone temple, remnants of an altar, and over 2,000 graves. All these finds tell us about ancient practices and rituals. The team also found the foundations of 4 massive buildings, corner towers, and open-air courtyards, all with underground reservoirs to store water for agricultural use. There was also a smart irrigation system with canals and cisterns, which let the city thrive in one of the driest deserts in the world. Rock drawings etched into the nearby mountain depicted the daily life of the locals. The excavations have been going on in the area for over 40 years, and scientists still keep finding new artifacts to answer more of their questions. Fishers have stumbled upon ancient bones, tools, and artifacts that are 9,000 years old on the North Sea floor. British and Dutch archaeologists and paleontologists rushed to see the finds as they were hoping it could be evidence of the submerged Doggerland. And they weren't disappointed. There were even perfect sets of footprints left by Mesolithic people who lived here. 12,000 years ago, during the last major ice age, the British Isles weren't islands at all. There was a landmass made of many hills, marshlands, and dense forests that connected them to the European continent. That landmass was Doggerland, where a prehistoric hunter-gatherer society lived and thrived. But then, the sea level started going up at the speed of 3 to 6 feet a century as glaciers were slowly but surely melting. The locals had to move to areas that today belong to England and the Netherlands. Experts decided to learn more about the history of Doggerland, using data from oil companies working in the North Sea. So far, they've created digital models of what the area of 18,000 square miles might have looked like before it vanished beneath the waves. They still need to analyze samples of ancient insects and plants and the DNA of animals to get a full picture.
Many terrifying animals live deep beyond the waves, like this vampire squid living 3,000 feet below the surface in almost complete darkness. This animal has a cloak, like a vampire's. That's why it's called the vampire squid. Deep down at the bottom, it can't use ink to defend itself. So this animal has developed an unusual tactic. It glows slightly to scare away predators. If this tactic fails, the vampire squid can turn its body inside out, revealing tiny spikes. When you translate its scientific name, Vampiroteuthis infernalis, it literally means vampire squid from the nether. Despite its terrifying looks, it's a harmless ocean animal. This previous creature was not from space, but this object definitely is. Before Elon Musk found a way to reuse rockets, NASA would simply drop old ones after launching astronauts into space, most of the time in the ocean or deserts. In 2012, Jeff Bezos launched a mission to find the Apollo 11 rocket. They found it by using sonar, but it was in terrible condition. It was sitting on the bottom of the ocean, not far from the predicted site. They were able to rescue the engine and reconstruct 2 of them. The most famous lost city is Atlantis, but sadly, we still haven't discovered it. However, Heraklion was also just a myth until one British pilot saw something that looked like a city while flying over the Mediterranean Sea. He reported it, and 60 years later, a group of divers went there. They were shocked when they found an entire city underwater. It was loaded with artifacts that could tell us a lot about the history of the place. Now it's one of the best underwater archaeological sites in the world. It's believed that the rising sea caused the whole city to go underwater. The Titanic sank in 1912. The wreck was claimed to be officially discovered 74 years later. In reality, though, a fisherman found the Titanic 8 years earlier while fishing in the Atlantic Ocean. He was pulling out his net when he spotted a head stuck in it. Luckily, it was just a doll's head. Years later, after the fisher had passed away, his son sold the doll to a doll collector. She did a lot of digging and research on every person who had a porcelain toy on the Titanic. She found the owner of the doll. Ava Hart was on the Titanic and had a doll with her. Ava survived the catastrophe by a miracle, but her toy didn't. Hart even wrote about the doll in her journal, and every detail matched the toy found by the fisherman. The tripod fish lives deep in the abyssal zone, around 20,000 feet below the surface. It's adapted to such immense depths and uses its tripod fins to stay still on the bottom. This creature doesn't have big eyes, but even if it did, these eyes would be useless in the darkness. Instead, the tripod fish uses its fins like antennas to detect any movement in the water. This creature doesn't have much luck when it comes to its love life, so it had to develop unique tactics to reproduce. One fish can be both male and female. The next bizarre creature is the lizardfish. It has tons of razor-sharp teeth, a huge mouth, and really big eyes, which it uses for hunting. All this makes the animal look freaky. The lizardfish lives at depths of around 11,000 feet in the midnight zone, where there is zero light. This freak of nature basically eats everything it can fit inside its mouth, from small fish to other lizardfish. On the other hand, when they see other reptile fish, they probably fall in love instead, because finding mates at those depths is not an easy task. Like the tripod fish, the lizardfish can be both male and female at the same time. When you think of a river, you usually picture it on land. Still, nature is quite unpredictable, and it created a river flowing under the ocean in California. It's running at a depth of around 2 miles. This river has everything that an ordinary river has: sunken logs, trees, and rocks. And despite its uniqueness, it's not the only one in the world. There are also others in the Amazon and Greenland. A terrifying creature was discovered near Angola's coast by a remote operating vehicle. It looks like it doesn't have a head or a body. It was sitting at a depth of around 4,350 feet below the surface. After doing research, scientists concluded it wasn't anything from a sci-fi movie. It was just a cluster of siphonophores stuck together. In 2015, some random guy was diving in Caesarea, and something shiny caught his eye. He reached out, grabbed it, and realized it was a gold coin. After that, he examined the bottom and found out that there were many more. He reported the incident to the local authorities, and they concluded that he had found Arabic treasure. The coins were made of solid 24-karat gold and were a few thousand years old, but due to the perfect salinity and temperature, they looked brand new. The coins belonged to a ship carrying cargo. It was caught up in a storm and unfortunately sank. One of the weirdest things ever discovered was found in the Baltic Sea. It's an anomaly that looks as if it was created by a different civilization. It was discovered by Swedish researchers, and they basically had no idea what it was. They had to ask tons of other scientists for their opinions. When you look at this formation from above, it's 200 feet long and looks exactly like a fallen spaceship. It's hard to believe that it's a natural formation, but spoiler alert, it's totally made by nature because the Baltic Sea has gone through many erosions throughout history. Most likely, the bizarre formation is the result of these processes. A group of divers in Madagascar were shocked when they found this 7-foot monstrosity of a knife on the seafloor. The speculation started immediately, and many said that the knife was from some giants that had fought megalodons and lived on Earth thousands and thousands of years ago. That could make a nice story, but the knife is most likely a movie prop that was lost at sea. One of the ocean's most bizarre animals is the frilled shark. It's believed that this fish is the reason for all those sea serpent stories that sea explorers of the past wrote about. These animals live pretty deep in the ocean. but sometimes they can be seen in shallow waters. It's super rare, but possible. The frilled shark has a big mouth sporting around 300 teeth. It also has a long body that looks like a lizard's, and it is truly a unique species of shark. Its prey can be half of its size because this shark's stomach is like that of a snake, and it can swallow huge fish or crustaceans. Spotting a few worms in your garden is no big deal, but after seeing a 26-foot-long one in the ocean, you will make your wetsuit a little wetter. This worm is super rare, and it's completely harmless to humans. It's actually not a giant worm. It's a cluster of zooids that are stuck together in a worm-shaped formation. They usually only eat plankton, bacteria, and other tiny things that can be found in the ocean. Probably the scariest thing in the ocean that is 100% real is the magna pinna, which can be found at crazy depths of 20,000 feet below the surface. This monster looks like an underwater Slender Man, but it's just a squid with really long tentacles that can reach a terrifying size of 8 feet. This guy has only been seen a few times, and basically, we don't know much about this creature so far. Hey there! Imagine a place on Earth that's just like Venus. It's Chile's Atacama Desert. I assume you wouldn't want to spend your holidays there. Similar to other deserts, this one isn't exactly the friendliest place. It's a long stretch of land close to the Andes Mountains. This makes it one of the driest spots on the planet. In fact, it's so dry that only a few places in Antarctica have stayed without rain for longer. This tough environment has some benefits to offer. Because it's located high up and doesn't have many clouds or a lot of light pollution, it's become the perfect home for advanced telescopes. These telescopes help us explore the cosmos. A new study from June 2023 revealed that this desert is even weirder and more out of this world than we had thought. It makes sense that a desert as dry as this one gets a lot of sun. On average, it has about 308 watts of sunlight per 10 square feet. That's almost twice as much as places like Europe or the eastern United States get. Raul Cordero is a scientist. He and his team checked out the sunlight in the spot housing the biggest telescope project ever, the Atacama Large Millimeter Array. And this is the sunniest place on Earth. This is what you'd experience if you were about 79% of the way from the sun to Earth. Of course, if you were actually on Venus, you would have way bigger things to worry about than just a lot of sunlight. Now let's figure out why this place is almost as sunny as Venus. It's because of clouds. Usually, clouds block sunlight and keep us cool, but sometimes they can act like a magnifying glass in special situations, concentrating the sun's rays. This is called forward scattering. This happens when certain types of clouds show up during the South American monsoon in the middle of the summer. During the summer in the southern hemisphere, we're actually a bit closer to the sun, and there's less ozone in that part of the world. This combo might explain why other high places on Earth, like the Himalayas, don't get as much intense sunlight as this desert. Let's talk more about Venus. What would it be like to stand on the surface of this planet? The more you learn about this sweltering world, the less you want to picture yourself there. It's not a friendly place at all, with crazy heat and super heavy air that could crush you. But pretend for a moment that you're on Venus. The air there is thick and heavy, 93 times denser than what we have on Earth. The air presses you down. Think of having a small car resting on your thumbnail. That's how it would feel. Or think about diving really deep into the ocean. You'd feel a lot of pressure pushing on your body. But on Venus, it's like having all the pressure of the atmosphere squishing and almost flattening you. What is the weather like on Venus? Ouch! Heat. Even though Mercury is closer to the sun, Venus wins the prize for the hottest planet's surface. That thick air on Venus is mostly carbon dioxide, which acts like a blanket. When the sun shines on Venus, the heat gets trapped by this blanket of air, and the planet heats a lot. Temperatures on Venus can hit 860 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, how do we explore Venus without getting roasted or squished? Well, going there in person is a no-go. Robots can handle it, yet even robots have struggled on Venus. Only a handful have made it to the surface. And they only managed to survive for a few hours before getting wrecked by the harsh conditions. The good news is we're figuring out ways to study Venus without putting anyone at risk. Future missions will check Venus out from above. Spacecraft up there will be able to see through the atmosphere without any trouble. NASA's got the Veritas mission. Its aim is to make detailed maps of Venus from orbit, giving us a new view of the place. So we've examined the driest desert on our planet, the Atacama Desert. No wonder this area is the place that serves as testing grounds for space missions. But despite how arid this region is, there is life there. This is a realm of flamingos and lagoons. The place has colossal salt flats that extend for 4,633 square miles at a depth of 82 feet. It's a place of erupting geysers, naturally heated springs, towering volcanoes, herds of llamas, and deserts so parched that certain pockets have remained untouched by rain for over half a millennium. All this unfolds 2 to 3 miles above the sea level. What else survives in the Atacama Desert? It's quite hard to fathom that plants could thrive in such inhospitable conditions. Yet, they manage to survive here. Take, for instance, Tillandsia landbecki. These plants defy the odds in the desert by extracting moisture from the fog that rolls in from the nearby coast. This fog water can also serve as a sustainable water source for humans. These plants lack traditional roots. Instead, they use their older, deceased parts to anchor themselves in the sand, forming little dune-like structures. They draw moisture out of the mist through their slender leaves and shoots, which swell upon contact with water. Nocturnal dew also provides water, particularly during the summer when fog is scarce. Together, plant communities existing there are known as lomas vegetation. The presence of this vegetation in the Atacama Desert is limited to a narrow coastal area where fog regularly occurs. Factors such as the distance from the Pacific, prevailing wind direction, and topography restrict the distribution of fog ecosystems. Satellite data analysis reveals that plants grow at altitudes ranging from 2,625 feet to 4,100 feet above sea level and up to 28 miles inland. They are mainly found on sandy plains along fog corridors or on slopes. They're about as tall as 1.5 feet, and they usually form a line. This clever lineup helps them catch all the moisture and yummy nutrients they need. The arrangement of these clusters depends on how much foggy water they can find. These tough desert plants are like water wizards of the plant world. They're so good at surviving in the desert that they give us ideas about getting water from fog. Water is precious in places like Iquique and small villages near the desert. Plus, with all the digging for stuff like copper and lithium, which makes batteries work, they need even more water. Usually, people get drinking water from under the ground, but these little plants have something to teach us. Using this trick, we're making a map showing where these plants like to party most. This map could help us find perfect spots for catching fog with special nets. Here's another idea that will make you feel like you're on the surface of another planet. Pelican Point is in Namibia. You might not expect it, but Pelican Point is actually a great place to surf. Every year, it only gets around 0.30 inches of rain, but that doesn't stop surfers from riding the waves. The weather is kind of unique here. It's hardly ever too hot or too cold. This place has an unusual type of dry climate, thanks to the cold ocean currents near the bay. Skeleton Bay, alternatively named Donkey Bay, is an iconic surfing location. The surf wave crashes onto the sands of Pelican Point, situated about 5 miles northwest of Walvis Bay, a compact harbor town famous for its sand dunes and secure anchorage. Would you surf there?
What is a boat doing in the middle of a desert? You would expect to find a seagoing vessel closer to shore. This is the question archaeologists had been asking for decades. In 1988, there was a storm near one of the most important archaeological sites in ancient Egypt. A wooden structure emerged from the sand. It was hollowed out by termites. Scientists were determined to solve its mystery. In 2000, they began excavating the site near Abydos, Ubidos. An American team of experts soon discovered a boat that was 70 feet long, and it wasn't alone. In total, there were 14 boats neatly resting next to each other. It was impossible to completely dig out the boats because of their poor condition. Luckily, the wood was preserved enough to get a sample. Analyses revealed that the boats were around 5,000 years old, the oldest fleet in human history to this date. The time of their construction predates the pyramids at Giza by half a millennium. Each ship of the fleet rested in a vault that matched its dimensions. The room was roughly a third of the size of a tennis court. It had mud brick walls that featured more than 120 drawings of boats. Ancient Egyptians incised them on whitewashed walls that were excellently preserved. Scientists have known about these mysterious chambers for well over a century. 1901, 1902. A British archaeologist, Arthur Weigel, stumbled upon a strange structure west of the River Nile. His team caught a glimpse of the interior walls. Sadly, a section of the roof collapsed, so they had to call off further exploration. Researchers abandoned the site, but its location remained on the maps. The boat's position first led scientists to think that they rested on a bank of the mighty Nile. But there was a problem with this theory. Today, the river flows almost 7 miles west of Abydos. Further studies of the surrounding terrain showed the Nile didn't change its course throughout history. Also, if the boats floated near a dock, they would be in unstable positions. The 14 vessels at Abydos were perfectly parallel to each other. There was only one conclusion possible. Someone had deliberately placed them like that. They must have gone through a lot of effort. Each boat had enough room for up to 30 rowers. These vessels could really float. They weren't models, but scholars still don't know if they actually sailed any body of water in ancient Egypt. This doesn't diminish the importance of the find. Previously, archaeologists found only small-scale models. In King Tut's tomb alone, there were 35 boat models. For a long time, these figurines were the only clues as to how ancient Egyptian vessels looked like. The boat's design confirms that they were the real deal. They are the earliest surviving examples of something called built boats. Ancient people constructed primitive vessels by hollowing out large tree trunks. The alternative was reed that was tied together to form a raft. The boats at Abydos had planks tied together. This was a major breakthrough in shipbuilding. During their lifetime, the boats must have seemed impressive. Timber was a valuable commodity at the time. There was no wood in the desert. Cedar had to be imported from Lebanon. The only person who could afford such luxury was the pharaoh. Studying the area around the ancient fleet provided more answers. Scientists discovered a mud brick structure where Egyptians worshipped the pharaoh. Its approximate date of construction matches that of the wooden boats. The same bricks out of which this building was made were used to encase the fleet. At the time of their construction, the rooms they were stored in had a ceiling. That's the section that archaeologists stumbled upon in the early 20th century. Just like mummies and coffins, these marvelous ships rested inside splendid vaults. The exterior of these rooms was also impressive. The outer walls originally had a plaster of white limestone. It reflected sunlight. In the desert sun, the structure housing the boats must have shone from miles away. Ancient Egyptian builders used the same technique to cover the pyramids 500 years later. Today, their surface looks jagged, but it wasn't always like this. When they were constructed, the pyramids had a top layer of fine white limestone. Their surface was smooth and it gleamed in the sunlight. Instead of stairs, the outer layer of the pyramids was more of a sleek ramp. Archaeologists were left with one final question. Which pharaoh owned the fleet? The answer lay just a mile from the site. This is where the tomb of a pharaoh from the 5th dynasty rested, King Senwosret III. Its time and style of construction matched the ones of the chambers with boats. The very end of his rule might explain how the boats ended up in the middle of the desert. The pharaoh probably passed away in northern Egypt. Then his body was transported down the Nile to Abydos in a marvelous procession of decorated boats. The vessels were later lowered to chambers near the final resting place of their owner. This had a symbolic meaning. In the ancient Egyptians' belief system, ships played a key role. Their supreme deity was Ra. He traveled through the sky during the day in the form of the sun. At nighttime, he sailed through the netherworld in a solar boat. The pharaoh identified himself with Ra. That's why he needed boats in the afterlife. That was the only way to regenerate himself. Just as the sun rises every day above the horizon. This belief existed for thousands of years. The more famous Pharaoh Khufu also had a ship. Scientists found it in 1954 next to his pyramid at Giza. It is some 4 centuries younger than the fleet at Abydos. But Khufu's ship was almost 2 times longer. The Great Pyramid of Giza and King Tut's tomb are some of the most famous archaeological finds in Egypt. But there are many more secrets hiding beneath the endless sands of the Sahara Desert. Recently, 2020, archaeologists found a lost city there. They have labeled it as the most important discovery since King Tut's tomb, 1922. The city of Aten is some 3,000 years old. Historians hope it will give them a unique insight into the everyday life of ancient Egyptians. The famous archaeologist and Egyptologist Zahi Hawass proclaimed the site a lost golden city. Aten sits some 300 miles south of Egypt's capital, Cairo. It is close to the famous Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists first found sections of mud brick walls that spread out in all directions. They discovered complete rooms with tools of everyday life inside. The research team unearthed a bakery, a residential neighborhood, and an administrative district. They all date back to the time when the Egyptian civilization was the wealthiest in its long history. They were also the first to make objects from iron. In 1911, scientists found a set of iron beads near a village in Lower Egypt, El Girza. These are the earliest known iron artifacts. The discovery is literally out of this world. Ancient people made them by beating into shape a piece of a meteorite. The 9 beads were once part of an ornate necklace. They are now blackened and corroded, which is perfectly normal for a piece of jewelry that is over 5,000 years old. They consist of an iron-nickel alloy. Researchers were impressed by the skill of ancient jewelers who processed the beads. Their craftsmanship is more impressive when you think that they didn't know the stellar origins of the material. The Great Pyramid of Giza also has a remarkable feature. An international research group investigated the electromagnetic response of the structure to radio waves. They found that the pyramid has the ability to concentrate electromagnetic energy inside it. This occurred inside its chambers as well as under the pyramid's base. It contains an underground, unfinished chamber. It seems that the electromagnetic response is connected with the properties of limestone, the Great Pyramid's main building material. The research results might have a practical application. The way solar cells and nanosensors function could be improved by this remarkable find.
How about playing golf? Not on Earth, but on the moon. Let's journey back to a time 50 years ago when one astronaut turned the lunar surface into the most unusual golf course ever. Any golfer will tell you how tricky it is to avoid sand traps, but picture Alan Shepard, a NASA astronaut dealing with an entire surface that feels like super fine powder. During the Apollo 14 mission, he took a break to showcase some spacey golf skills for everyone watching from Earth. After his first shot, he excitedly made another. For him, it seemed the ball went forever and ever. Let's dial back to reality for a moment. Thanks to the research by the United States Golf Association, or USGA, we've got some numbers. They found that Alan's first moon ball traveled 24 yards, and his second stretched for 40 yards. Now, how does that compare to the average golf shots back here? In regular gravity, one usually swings to about 216 yards. Just goes to show, while we've upgraded our golf game on Earth with tech and training, the moon's low-gravity playground is a different environment altogether. Now, let's give Alan some props. Moon golf? Not as simple as you might think. His club wasn't one from your local sports store. It was a makeshift one. A moon sample collector with a club head stuck to it. Add to that the bulky spacesuit he had on. Imagine trying to swing wearing an outfit that's as stiff as cardboard. With all that gear, Alan could only muster a one-handed swing. Care to have a similar experience? Well, you might not be able to play golf on the moon anytime soon, but you can give it a shot underwater. Some say the conditions are similar. Here's where it gets even more interesting. The USGA didn't just take Allen's word on where the balls landed. They wanted to investigate. For starters, they used ultra-clear footage of the Apollo 14 mission. They also used some sharp images from NASA's special moon camera, launched in 2009. Using this imagery, they mapped out the journey of those two golf balls. Allen loved his unique golf club so much, he wanted to bring it back home. No big deal, right? Well, you see, in those days, astronauts would leave behind unnecessary items to make space for moon rocks. But not this club. So during the 70s, this interstellar golf club found a new home at the USGA Museum in New Jersey. Unlike regular golf clubs, this one had a twist. It was crafted from aluminum and Teflon. It was built to fold and fit snugly within the tight spaces of the lunar lander. How did this whole moon golf idea even pop up? Well, in 1970, golf legend Bob Hope paid a visit to NASA. Inspired by Hope's love for golf, an idea came into Shepard's head: moon golf. To turn his dream into reality, he collaborated with a golf professional and NASA's tech specialists. Together, they crafted a club that met NASA's strict safety norms. But hey, Allen didn't want this to be just a surprise stunt. Remember, traveling to the moon required very strict protocols. They couldn't just randomly have a picnic up there, you know? So, Allen made sure NASA officials agreed with this impromptu game of golf. They were initially skeptical, but eventually gave the green light after Allen passionately laid out his plan. He also promised he'd start playing if everything went smoothly on the mission. Determined to make it perfect, Allen prepped like a champ. The story goes that he'd put on his hefty spacesuit and sneak off to secret spots so he could practice. Decades later, he'd still be reflecting on his lunar escapade. He was the only golfer to ever swing on the moon. It's not just golf balls that astronauts left behind on their trips. There were actually a lot of objects left on the moon between 1969 and 1972, the year of the last moon landing. Each time you gaze up at the moon, remember that there's a cute family photo up there, some huge science gadgets, a small statue, a bunch of, well, human waste bags, and yes, some American flags. Years have passed by, and yes, technically those items are still hanging out there, though they've probably seen better days because of the harsh conditions on the moon. Some items had a special place in the astronauts' hearts and were meant to stay on the moon. But hey, leaving some stuff behind also meant they could bring back moon samples. You know the feeling. It's like when you need to make room in your suitcase for souvenirs when you're finishing a vacation. Does NASA have a complete list of things they left on the moon? Well, not really. In fact, one team tried to create a record of some of the items and reached an amazing list of 106 left there from the Apollo 11 mission alone. And that's not counting Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin's famous footprints. The largest items at each landing site were mostly the sciencey stuff, like pieces of their lunar module and experiments to study the moon in depth. Then there were some beautiful tokens, like Apollo 11's plaque and a special disc with messages from leaders around the world. Some say the astronauts also took medals to remember some heroic cosmonauts, and they even left a gold olive branch, an age-old symbol of peace. Now, later moon missions had a little more fun, like Alan Shepard did with his golf game. But the award for the most heartwarming moment goes to Charlie Duke. During the Apollo 16 mission, he left a picture of his family up there. It's like he wanted them to be a part of the adventure. Although, a heads up, those photos probably didn't age well because of the moon's high exposure to the sun's radiation. There might just be an art museum up there on our satellite too. Let me explain. There's this tiny little art piece called the Moon Museum. It's a ceramic chip about the size of your nail, and it was crafted by an artist named Forrest Myers. This tiny object showcases miniature artworks from 6 talented people. Among them are even the famous Andy Warhol, the same artist known for his iconic soup cans and celebrity portraits. Forrest Myers said he wanted his mini museum to be on the moon, but there was a problem. NASA officials weren't exactly on board with the idea. However, Myers shared with the press that he handed over this art chip to an engineer working on the Apollo 12 mission. According to Myers, this engineer secretly tucked the Moon Museum onto a leg of the lunar lander. In case you haven't figured it out yet, these lunar landers don't come back to Earth after their mission. Take this with a grain of salt though, as NASA has never confirmed this story. You might wonder, why did they leave all these things? Sometimes it was about making a statement. Other times, it was purely practical. At one point, it was mentioned that during the Apollo 11 mission, for example, a decision needed to be made. The astronauts had to quickly figure out what was essential for their trip back home. They ended up creating a cleanup spot, tossing away things they didn't need anymore. Leaving things behind on the moon isn't that different from how we leave things behind on Earth. Just like archaeologists study our ancient leftovers to learn about our ancestors. The stuff on the moon gives us insights about those incredible lunar missions. Some things they left had done their job, like the pole for the flag or the camera they used to broadcast those steps on the moon. Even the tools astronauts used to collect samples were left because they had more precious cargo to bring back. Moon rocks. When it comes to the current state of all these items, scientists are not entirely sure. We do know that NASA's moon observer has spotted some of their shadows. They're still up there. The official gear was built to resist, so it might behave a bit better. But those personal items? They've probably seen better days. In the Mexican mountains, there is this ancient species of corn that's twice as big as your average cob and has some crazy aerial roots. These roots drip a slime that could change the game for agriculture and finally put an end to all those toxic chemicals. The locals have been growing this mysterious maize for over 2,000 years, passing down the tradition from generation to generation. A scientist in Oaxaca heard about this supersized corn and decided to check it out. When he finally saw it, he couldn't believe his eyes. This crop was like something out of a myth, towering at 16 to 18 feet tall, with weird fingers sticking out from its stalks. And get this, those fingers were dripping with a thick, gooey slime that acted like a self-fertilizer. No more adding artificial fertilizers to the soil. It's a big deal because most cereal grains can't fix their own nitrogen levels. So farmers have to douse them in nitrogen-rich fertilizers. Not only is this bad for the environment, but it's also expensive. But with this new corn slime, we might be able to solve a systemic problem in our food sources. It's like a biological hack that could revolutionize agriculture as we know it. The locals call this super plant Oloton corn. By the way, it was basically a secret to the rest of Mexico until the 80s. It took another 30 years for a team of researchers to study this super cool maize. They knew they needed the community's help, so they built a lab right where the locals could pitch in. The corn secretes a slime that has bacteria that can convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form the plant can absorb. It means it can draw 80% of its nitrogen from the air. Basically, the holy grail of agriculture. But of course, some people had to ruin the fun by arguing over who owns the rights to this magical corn. It's called biopiracy, and it's not cool. The indigenous people who have been taking care of this crop for centuries are saying, hey, this isn't just a crop, it's part of our culture and heritage. Unfortunately, the Oloton corn isn't being used yet because it can't keep up with modern industrial standards. But scientists are working on crossbreeding it with other varieties to see if they can get the best of both worlds. They've already cut growing time in half and increased nitrogen absorption to 40%. But they estimate it'll take a few more generations to stabilize a hybrid corn. Imagine if we could use atmospheric nitrogen for other cereal grains, like rice or wheat. That would be huge for reducing artificial fertilizers that harm our environment. It's crazy to think that a little-known maize from a misty mountain in Mexico could potentially solve world hunger. It just goes to show that diversity is essential to our survival. Speaking of plants that can help us survive in the future, Did you know that Mars might be the perfect place for leafy green vegetables to grow? The soil there is packed with iron, which means our favorite greens could thrive. And with Earth's future looking a little uncertain, it's not a bad idea to start thinking about other planets we could live on. Unfortunately, most planets are too hot to sustain life. Seriously, Venus can get up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hotter than metal melts. But Mars is different. Even though it's a cold desert now, billions of years ago it was covered in water and maybe even life. Scientists are already studying which plants could grow on Martian soil. And it turns out that lettuce, onions, kale, peas, garlic, and even dandelions, yep, those weeds in your backyard, could all potentially survive there. Spinach is another great option thanks to all that iron in the soil. Who knows, maybe one day we'll all be snacking on Martian microgreens in case Olaton corn can't cover all our needs. One more super plant that can help us in the future is bamboo. And while other countries like China, Japan, the Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia are all about chowing down on those delicious bamboo shoots, they're also a local fave here in the islands. In Bangladesh, they even have a traditional dish that's made with bamboo. No wonder they call it the king of vegetables. It's delicious and packed with health benefits. Plus, just half a cup has 11% of your daily potassium needs. If you're lucky enough to find fresh bamboo shoots, look for ones that are firm and heavy with a wide base. And don't let them turn green. That means they've been out in the sun too long and will taste bitter. If you're feeling adventurous, you can even harvest your own shoots, let's say in Hawaii. But bamboo is not only about food. It boasts a lot of cool things. It's the fastest growing plant on Earth. Some types of bamboo can grow over a few feet in just one day. More than an inch every hour, people. Bamboo is also totally sustainable and renewable because it spreads like wildfire. A bamboo forest grows way faster than a tree forest, so it's basically the superhero of the plant kingdom. Now, some folks say that bamboo can produce up to 35% more oxygen than a bunch of trees put together. Oh, and get this! Bamboo can replace wood in almost anything you can think of. Seriously, there are thousands of bamboo products out there that are just as good as their wooden counterparts. We're talking paper and pulp products, flooring, musical instruments, furniture, construction materials, you name it, bamboo's got it covered. On to some serious stuff. According to British researchers, we're barely scratching the surface of what plants can do for us. First up, we've got super plants. Did you know that the veggies on your plate were once just regular old crops? But out in the wild, there are some seriously tough plants that have developed resistance to all sorts of pests and diseases. Plant breeders are working to crossbreed these wild crops with our domesticated ones, making them just as resilient while still giving us all the benefits we love. It's a global effort, with countries like Brazil, China, and India leading the charge. And with the world population set to hit over 9 billion, these super plants could be a total lifesaver. Next on the list, medicinal plants. We've known for ages that plants can heal us, but are we really making the most of it? There are over 28,000 plant species that have medicinal uses, but less than 16% of them are actually being used in medicine. That's crazy. The industry is worth billions, and countries like Germany are already embracing herbal remedies. But we need to be careful. There are plenty of dodgy products out there that could do more harm than good. Then we have bananas on steroids. Okay, not really. But did you know that we could actually make bananas bigger and better? By tweaking their genes. Don't worry, it's all safe and above board. Scientists can create bananas that are resistant to disease and pests and can even grow in harsher climates. That means more food for everyone. Last but not least, it turns out that the flammability of plants is super important when it comes to preventing wildfires and all the damage they can cause. But don't worry, fire is actually a natural process in some ecosystems. The scientists are on a mission to identify plant families that can withstand fires and create landscapes that are more resilient. These plants could even be used as natural fire breaks, saving valuable resources. Now meet cinchona. Not your typical food plant, but it's got some serious game. This tree bark is the secret ingredient to making quinine, which is used to cure malaria. And get this, it was actually the Quechua people of Peru who schooled the newcomers on how to use it. There are some wild stories about cinchona out there. Like, have you heard about the sick lions chewing on the bark? Or the febrile lion that drank from a pond with cinchona bark and was instantly cured? But let's be real, these legends are probably just people trying to make an already cool story even cooler. Anyway, cinchona is a hero, but not all the heroes wear capes.
Do you remember 2011? Well, play along with me. A diver is set to go deep into the waters of the Musi River, located in the heart of an Indonesian island. He is one among many who have been getting unbelievable artifacts from the bottom of the river. Little by little, divers and fishers discover a long-lost Sumatran civilization. Known as the Island of Gold, the kingdom of Srivijaya was most likely the closest to a real-life El Dorado there has ever been. However, it disappeared late in the 13th century, and until recently, researchers didn't even know the exact location of the kingdom. Picture a civilization built on a river, a true water world. According to the archaeologists that have been studying Srivijaya, houses, markets, and places of worship were built on wooden piles above the level of the water. Citizens moved around like modern-day Venetians in simple boats. Srivijaya was known to be a rich and important kingdom. It existed from the 7th to the 11th century CE. It was part of the Silk Road, and anyone traveling from east to west had to pass through the city. Their kings were smart and gained control of the Malacca Strait, which allowed the town to have total control over trading routes in the region. If anything, they sure were honoring the town's name. Srivijaya translates from Sanskrit into prosperous victor, or simply glorious. The kingdom was an important commercial outpost of ancient times. It was strategically located among the most influential commercial routes of the ancient world, which means its citizens became extremely rich. Ancient wealthy societies used to overly display their gold and precious metals. They would often use these metals as offerings to their deities, or they would use them to forge large statues and to make jewelry for kings and queens and decorations for their palaces. Srivijaya wasn't different. Local Indonesian divers who have been exploring the half-mile of the Musi River near the city of Palembang have found some evidence. So far, they've discovered a life-size statue of Buddha, jewelry studded with precious gems, temple bells, mirrors, golden jugs, and other items. No official archaeological excavations have been done in the area, so these artifacts are the first items of the Srivijayan Empire ever found. Sean Kinslett, a British maritime archaeologist who has reported on these discoveries, says he is truly surprised. For long, people have been speculating about the true wealth of Srivijaya, and it seems that the rumors have been confirmed. We're starting from ground zero, he says. We don't know what clothes the people of Srivijaya wore, what their tastes were, what kinds of ceramics they like to eat off. Even though this discovery has brought excitement to the scientific community, there is a downside. Divers and fishers sell the retrieved artifacts at the International Antiquities Market before archaeologists can take a look at them. Researchers could try to buy some items, but they're sold for millions of dollars worldwide. Most of the information we know about this El Dorado of the East was learned from merchant accounts of the city. These descriptions say Srivijaya was a kingdom of human-eating snakes and multilingual parrots. That's weird. Some say its active volcanoes gave the town an eerie and enigmatic sight, and all stories emphasize the amount of gold available there. Travel reports were a common way to describe cities in ancient times. In case you didn't know, this is how the legend of El Dorado originally began. As European explorers began their excavations in South American lands back in the 1500s, the word got out that an Amazonian civilization used to paint their leader in gold as an offering to higher powers. The legend of El Hombre Dorado, also known as the Golden Man, began to quickly spread around Europe. It turned out that it was only a ceremonial piece of pre-Columbian civilization. It had nothing to do with the land of infinite gold. Now, no one knows what brought about the decline of the Srivijaya Empire. Some speculate that its active volcanoes could have swallowed it, or maybe wooden houses built above the river eventually sank. Maybe if divers keep retrieving lost items from the bottom of the river, archaeologists will be able to figure out what happened to the city. It seems to be quite common in the history of the world. Some ancient civilizations disappeared without a trace, as happened with the Mayan civilization, for example. The Mayans managed to build one of the biggest empires in pre-Columbian America. It was believed to be home to over 2 million people, and it thrived for over 6 centuries. Its sudden demise is something that bothers archaeologists and scientists alike. The Mayans began to settle in South America as early as 1500 BCE. Their civilization spanned Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. They are believed to have built around 40 cities at the height of their empire. They also developed a complex hieroglyph system that has been studied since it was discovered by modern scientists. The Mayans were keen engineers, astronomers, and farmers. They were post-nomadic people that settled in vast areas of farmland where they could grow corn and other types of vegetables. Archaeologists are still learning a lot about the Mayan civilization by examining their ruins. The city of Chichen Itza, located in the Yucatan Peninsula, is one of the most important Mayan sites unearthed today. The site is made up of a total of 26 ruins, and it is home to a world-famous pyramid known as El Castillo. It consists of a series of square terraces with stairways on each of the 4 sides of the temple. It was built as an homage to a feathered serpent deity. The Mayans were such architectural geniuses that they managed to build a pyramid that cast a particular shadow. More specifically, in the late afternoon during the spring and fall equinoxes, the pyramid casts several triangular shadows that create the illusion of a feathered serpent crawling down the pyramid. And they created this with none of the tech we have today. The city is so amazing that since 2007, it has been considered one of the 7 wonders of the New World. The Mayan Empire thrived for over 6 centuries due to their wise resource management system and astronomical knowledge. They were able to accurately predict eclipses, and using their rudimentary technology, could even locate Venus and Mars. They had everything to thrive for much longer than they actually did. This is why the Mayans' fall intrigues modern scientists so much. No one has been able to understand completely what led to their demise. That is, until a recent discovery. A study done by NASA claims it can explain what might have happened. Scientists have uncovered a sample of pollen trapped for over 1,200 years in ancient layers of lake sediment, which dates back to the time just before the collapse of the civilization. The analysis has revealed something completely new about the Mayans. Instead of the suspected claims that the Mayans disappeared due to terrible disease or some extended conflict in the region, it could have happened due to deforestation. Perhaps to build their entire empire, they had to cut a lot of trees. Without trees, their soil could have eroded, and all their fertile lands could have slowly and gradually become barren. According to NASA scientists, the temperatures in the region could have risen by about 6 degrees, and from that point on, the land would have become even drier and crops more difficult to grow. Basically, NASA says that the Mayans couldn't do the sole thing that made them thrive, which was agriculture, and their kingdom began to decline. Oh yeah, and this theory was supported by yet another find. Archaeologists found skeletons from the time of the empire. Those had prominent signs of malnutrition. This theory might really shed new light on Mayan history. It could explain what brought down such a powerful civilization. So, what do you say? Which theory is true? Have we actually managed to find out the reason for the fall of the Mayan Empire?
The internet is full of wonders and is also your free encyclopedia, giving answers to the present and the past. Found something weird while cleaning the attic in your grandma's house and don't know what it is? Google Images and internet strangers are ready to help. I'll show you some interesting examples. Keep count of how many items you recognized. This guy here found a jar of gold powder in his grandfather's attic and asked Reddit what it could be for. Maybe you know. Gladly, Redditors knew the answer. This powder is used for embossing. With an embossing pen, you write what you need on a piece of paper. Then you dump the powder all over what you've written. Some powder sticks to the surface, and then you dump off all the excess. The final step is to go over it with a heat gun, and ta-da! You have your embossing ready in shining gold, or whatever your powder color is. Another Reddit user found this thing, something with a compass, a little display, and 2 slots. Your guess? What is it? It is a quartz car compass clock that used to be inserted into the car. The compass is there for navigation. Back when people didn't have Google Maps, they were using regular maps, and a compass was a necessity. The display shows the time, and the 2 slots are there to store coins for tolls. Things are getting more mysterious. The next thing is these solid cylinders. Do you have any ideas about what it could be? These are screw machine heading punches that are used for shaping the heads of screws. WSP Co. stands for Wrentham Steel Products, a company from Massachusetts that supplies cold heading tools. 8R identifies that it's a round head punch, and a 372 means that it was made in March 1972. 3P 2021 identifies it as a Phillips pan head punch, and 471 stands for April 1971. The next thing a Redditor found honestly scared me. I had 0 ideas about who might need this kind of thing. Do you? Turns out this thing dates back to the 16th century, and they were quite common back then. It was first mentioned in the 1550s when a naturalist found one of these in a seaside shop. Apparently, back in the olden days, sailors would catch rays and skates, dry them, and carve them to make them resemble mermaids. Then they were selling them to tourists to earn some extra cash. I have no idea who would buy them, but apparently they were quite popular. They even had a name. They are called Jenny Hanover. It's believed that the name originated from the French phrase Jean d'Anvers, which translates as a young person from Antwerp, since they were commonly sold in Antwerp back then. Some people still collect those, and that Redditor is a lucky owner of a now rare mummy mermaid. Here is the next finding a guy found at a yard sale. Do you know what it is? In reality, it's not as scary as it looks. This is just a butcher thumb guard that is used to protect the finger from cutting or chopping it off. These days, butchers just wear modern cut-resistant gloves. The next user asked Reddit what this thing was. It was found folded with a cap on top of it, and it can be unfolded to even larger than a bracelet. Can you think of something it could be for? Can you see those little metal rings on the bottom of it? They can be attached to a fabric, and this thing will serve as a top closing part for a handbag. Here's the next finding by another Reddit user. A vial with yellow liquid inside. Have you ever seen this thing or something similar? Here's the answer. It is a fire suppressant sprinkler fuse. They can be seen in most public places for protection. They are inserted into a pipe cap and serve as a plug. It's designed to get activated when the temperature reaches a particular level, and then the water will flow exactly over the fire. The sprinklers vary in color, depending on the triggering temperature. Ordinary ones are orange or red in color. Yellow and green ones are for higher temperatures, then blue for even higher temperatures, and then purple for even higher than that. Lastly, black ones are those that get triggered by 575 degrees Fahrenheit and above. A sprinkler system was designed back in the 15th century by Leonardo da Vinci, and it's still commonly used today. Another finding is a capsule with many tiny metal shavings. Any ideas? Well, these are copper oxide needles. They are made from 99.9% pure virgin electrical grade copper wire. It's an actual pill that is given to animals such as goats, sheep, lambs, deer, calves, camels, and alpacas. That's because they serve as a copper supplement. The capsule is made of gelatin and it dissolves, releasing the needles. Then the needles dissolve too, releasing copper that is vital for the animal's nutrition. They need copper for better immunity, growth, and reproduction. For example, sheep that don't have enough copper in their system have worse wool that loses its pigmentation. Copper-deficient lambs might have problems with their nervous system, and standing and walking can be quite tough for them. So the pills are important for animals, but you humans should stay away from them. Here's a new, interesting finding from a different user. Even if you don't know what it is, you can try to give it a guess, because the answer will make perfect sense. These metal installments in the staircase are there to make it easier to sweep the dust out of the corners. Now we have vacuum cleaners, and it's not a problem to get to those corners, but back in the olden days, this invention was genius. Here's another fun thing from a user. What do you think this color code table is? They are times. See, 1 is white, 2 is blue, and 3 is pink. 4 is 2 times 2, which is 2 blue bars. 5 is an additional color, yellow. But 6, which is 2 times 3, consists of 2 bars. A blue one for 2 and a pink one for 3. Probably nothing can beat a mermaid carved out of a dry scat, but this thing comes close in its craziness. Like, what is this thing? Do you have any idea? Turns out, it's just a reusable hand warmer. There's a metal disc inside. It needs to be pressed, and then a chemical reaction will start to heat the pad. Okay, what do you think this is? Honestly, my first thought was that it's a cat door. Do you have any better guesses? Apparently, these are boot scrapers. They were a must in the 19th century. The roads were too dirty, and the front wall of most houses had one of these to scrape off the mud before walking into the house. Now that we have modern clean pavements, boot scrapers aren't in high demand, but old houses still have these. Okay, I have a couple more for you, like this thing, for example. This user found it attached to a kitchen counter. Maybe you've seen one of these. Right, it's just a can opener. This metal what was found by a Redditor in a residential area in France. What do you think it is? A person from France commented that they had just parked their bike there. This is a bike rack. Another oddity found by a Redditor. My first guess is that it was a water storage tank or filter of some kind. You'll never guess what it is. You ready? It's an instrument called a gopichand, also referred to as an ektara. Made out of bamboo and a single string, it's used for the traditional music of South Asia, currently used in modern-day music in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. This Redditor found an interesting metal object in the woods of Uruguay. At first glance, he thought it looked like an arrow or part of a crossbow. I would have to agree with him. Turns out, this object is a meat thermometer. Normally it will have the degrees on the metal part and a heating tube in the middle. How that found its way into the woods of Uruguay is a riddle of its own.
You don't need to go to the end of the world or some exotic land to see strange things. You just need to go to Reddit. Check out how its users share weird and crazy stuff they found in their houses. It's rare when old finds in the house have any value, but this married couple managed to win the jackpot. In Cleveland, Ohio, they started making home repairs. The man was tearing dusty boards from the ceiling in the basement when he noticed something behind bars. It was a small green suitcase. He found the second one in another part of the basement. At first, the husband and wife thought the suitcase contained some old baseball cards, but instead, they found a treasure worth 33,000 pounds. There were old banknotes, and some of them were very rare. They were delighted with this find, but didn't spend money on entertainment. According to the man, they used the cash to pay off their mortgage. These people were even luckier. Several residents of a small English town in North Yorkshire were doing repairs in the house. They discovered one of the largest hoards of 18th century English gold coins ever found in Great Britain. The owners removed a small clay cup the size of a soda can, hidden in the concrete under the floorboards. The bowl's surface was covered with a thin layer of salt, and inside, there were about 260 gold coins. The estimated value of the entire treasure was about $200,000. But it all depends on the auction. Perhaps the amount will reach $500,000. One user came to his mom's new multi-apartment building. He went to the basement and found a huge bank vault there. There was this round, thick metal door leading to the bank safe. He didn't find any money or gold, but the vault was in excellent condition. Of course, other Reddit users found out how this could happen. If a bank goes bankrupt, it takes all its belongings from the building except for a giant safe. The fact is that dismantling such an object requires huge costs. It can't be removed without expensive equipment, so banks leave their safes in the building. Another Reddit user wrote that a law firm bought a closed bank building and turned the vault into an office. They couldn't break through a thick wall in this room to install a window, so they just hung a photo with a window. Another user showed a rather creepy discovery made in the basement of his house. It was a huge hole leading into the darkness and filled with cold liquid. The user didn't panic and measured the pit. It was only 8 feet deep, half filled with ordinary water. He didn't find anything else, no secret room or dungeon. In fact, this was not just a pit, but a particular well called a cistern. And again, thanks to Reddit users for the answer. In the past, people installed such things in many homes to replenish water supplies. Cisterns were popular in dry areas where residents couldn't access a water supply system, or when people were afraid that a river or reservoir was polluted. They collected rainwater and stored it in these wells. To avoid contamination from the surrounding soil, they cemented these pits. People used water for house cleaning, showering, and laundry. You could even install filters in such a tank to drink clean water. This user found something strange not in his house, but in the basement of the office where he worked. In a dark, concrete room, among the junk, he saw a red iron door leading into the unknown. "Keep closed at all times" was written on its cold surface. There were no locks or keyholes on it, only bolts. The user could have easily opened it, but didn't. Would you dare? The thing was actually not scary at all, but it was pretty dangerous. This is transformer storage with a powerful electrical voltage inside. It can explode or catch fire or even electrocute someone. Therefore, it was placed in the basement away from people. No one except electricians is allowed to go there. Someone found a strange tiny room in the attic of their new apartment, behind a small iron door. Inside, the user found a small bed, several shelves, and a small window. It seems that someone lived there, but who and why? There's almost no information about this. Imagine that you're walking through an abandoned house and suddenly see a phantom stuck in the wall and trying to escape. One Reddit user photographed an unusual installation in an abandoned house. It looks like a person trying to break out of the wall. Of course, there is no mystery or magic here, just someone's great sculptor skills, but still, it looks pretty creepy. Many users find secret rooms in their homes, and no one knows what those were used for and who lived there. But this guy found the most practical and valuable space. In the backyard of his house, he discovered a shelter from radioactive waste built in the 60s. It looks pretty atmospheric and safe. This user moved into a new house and found this strange white door in the wall. It looked like an area for a water heater or something, but it turned out that the door led to a strange room. It was small but cozy. Someone even put a carpet on the floor. But there was another door with a lock at the back of this room. The user opened the black door and stepped inside another, a much creepier room. The walls and ceiling were covered with soundproof plates and white plastic tarps. Also, he saw 3 to 4 outlets and some kind of pad that looked like a small bed. There was a briefcase on the floor with an old wooden box, envelopes with money from different countries, and 4 small silver bars. But the strangest thing in that place was a black safe. The user opened it and found several VHS cassettes and a white sheet. "Save yourself" was written on it in black ink. The user wanted to share the contents of the tapes on Reddit. Many people thought that all this was fake and didn't believe him. But then another user said he knew the previous owner of the house. It was just an ordinary guy. Then the user posted the contents of the tapes. The recordings were quite unsettling. Someone suggested that all this was a promo campaign for some horror movie. But then the same user admitted that it was all a hoax that had gone out of control and become viral. He wrote a post where he described in detail how he created it, but the site administration deleted it. Let's finish our list with the most unusual apartment. Imagine that you're walking through a residential Parisian neighborhood and entering a multi-story building where ordinary people live. You go up the stairs and stop near an old door. You press the handle down and go inside. It seems to you that you're in a horror movie about ghosts. Cabinets, chairs, all the furniture here is made at the beginning of the last century. All the rooms look like an old antique store. Everything is covered with a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. There are sinister-looking dolls and stuffed toys on the floor, but nothing strange happened here. The owner left this place in the 40s. She left everything as it was. She moved to live somewhere else and didn't tell anyone about the apartment. Why she didn't come back is also unknown. The apartment has been in this condition for 70 years. The owner's relatives hired appraisers to estimate the cost of the apartment. In 2010, they went to this place, opened the door, and found a painting by Italian artist Giovanni Boldini, which he created in the 19th century. This painting was sold for $2.5 million.
What you see in this picture is a puffball mushroom. A man was fishing on the river when he discovered the thing. It measured 81 inches across and weighed around 52 pounds when he cut it. Oh, and did you know that in terms of genetic comparisons, mushrooms are more closely related to us than to plants? This turtle was found on the beach in northern Wisconsin. In a small seaside town in Denmark, people have made the world's tallest sandcastle. According to the Guinness World Records, this castle is 69.4 feet tall and weighs nearly 5,000 tons. Here is the Hyperion, the tallest tree in the world. You can see it in the Redwood National Park in California. It has grown to be 380 feet tall, which means that it's taller than the Statue of Liberty. Imagine you go out to the garden and see this almost 3-foot-tall dandelion. What would you do? When people are very young, they often think about breaking some Guinness record. It might be running faster or jumping higher than the previous record holder. But growing the largest watermelon, and still an accountant from Tennessee grew a watermelon that weighed 350 pounds. In Canada, there's a cylindrical storage tank painted to resemble a Coke can. It's labeled as the world's largest Coca-Cola can. Meet Hercules. According to the Guinness World Records, he is the largest living feline in the world. Hercules is an adult male liger living in a wildlife reserve in South Carolina, USA. In total, he measures 10 feet in length, stands 4 feet at the shoulder, and weighs 922 pounds. Hercules also eats around 30 pounds of meat every day. Taking a picture of a large caterpillar on a toy earth mover is fun. This carrot probably had its roots deep in the soil, and now here it is, in the carrying arm of a human. Even if you only eat this chestnut, you'll probably already feel full. Here is a rebel berry. Imagine you're at a cash point and the machine keeps rejecting its sole purpose. You know, reading the barcode, and then you notice that a small line has formed behind you. This barcode probably won't let this happen to you. It's a good barcode. Who is this lucky person? I mean, not only did they find the biggest piece of chip, but it was also in a single piece, not broken. I guess someone is throwing a party. I bet your eyes first go to the fire extinguisher on the floor. Only after that will you notice the small one on the wall. This match and that fire extinguisher could be relatives. The grapest of all grapes is here. Probably every meal for the next 15 days included green onions. You know, to eat it while it's still fresh. I loved how the glasses looked compared to the onions. This family could make a lemonade for the whole neighborhood. In 2003, Aaron Shamuel grew the heaviest lemon in the world on his farm. The circumference of the lemon was 29 inches and it weighed about 12 pounds. It grew together with another lemon, almost as big. Look at this huge frog. Now might be a good time to debunk this myth. You won't get warts if you touch a frog. This myth might still be around because many frogs have wart-like bumps on their skin. These regular-sized penne pieces seem to be listening to the wise words of the longest one. The tallest penne has named itself Peneghetti. It says that if you believe in yourself, you can grow to be as long as spaghetti. If your favorite fruit is strawberry, this one is for you. It looks like a snake, I know, but it isn't. Make a guess. It's a zucchini. This pine cone looks as if someone has photoshopped it to be longer. A prawn as big as your hand. Any thoughts on this? A powerful wind gust, and this rabbit might be the first of its kind to fly. Look how small other things in the picture look. The Chinese giant salamander is one of the largest salamanders in the world. The blue whale is the largest animal of all time. This creature weighs around 198 tons and are up to 98 feet long. The blue whale's tongue can be as heavy as an elephant and its heart as heavy as a car. To feed such a huge body, they only eat tiny plankton. This one here is a giant cookie. I'm not joking. One company baked this cookie monster in 2003, and it was 102 feet wide and weighed over 40,000 pounds. Plus, it was edible. They cut the cookie into small pieces and sold them in a special commemorative box. It was a chocolate chip cookie, if you've ever been wondering about the type. What do you think about this absolute unit of a snail? A grown-up person's hand is there for comparison. Either these people have shrunk or this table is too large. I bet the dog thinks that it's still a baby. No more waiting in line to get gas. The Tsar Bell, aka the Royal Bell, and people nearby. The hand of Jeff Dabe, a wrestling champion. I would forget how to swim if I saw this lion's mane jellyfish. It generally lives in the northern Atlantic and northern Pacific Oceans. Is this a hat or a tent? This coffee cup is suitable for people who cannot start their mornings without drinking coffee, or those who say there's never enough coffee. Jackfruit is a common fruit in the Philippines, Southeast Asia, India, and Central Africa. The heaviest jackfruit in the world was grown in India. It weighed almost 95 pounds, plus it was 22.5 inches long. This flower is called the Rafflesia arnoldi. It's the world's largest blooming flower. It's a rare kind found in the rainforest of Indonesia. It can be 3 feet across and weigh up to 15 pounds. Interestingly, it has no visible leaves, roots, or stems. It attaches itself to a host plant to get water and nutrients. The next one is the tallest snow person in the world. The record is set in an Austrian ski region. The former record was set in Maine, USA. These shoes belong to Robert Wadlow. He was one of the tallest people ever, nearly 9 feet tall. Some of his shoes can still be found across America because Robert Wadlow never really wore them. He was a roving ambassador for a shoe company. He would arrive in a town, give the local shoe store a promotional size 37 shoe, then move on. He continued to grow throughout his life, so his final shoe size was 44.5. Think of the biggest cave you've ever seen. I bet that cave can easily fit into this cave in Vietnam. It measures 1.35 billion cubic feet. It's twice as large as the world's second biggest cave. So it's hard to break this record. Experts believe that it dates back to 2 to 5 million years ago. The cave formed from soluble limestone. Look at this massive bird. It no longer exists though. Its kind is named Argentavis. These creatures used to live in Argentina around 6 million years ago. Their wingspan could reach 21 feet. Oddly enough, their eggs were smaller than an ostrich egg. We started with one of the largest mushrooms in the world, so this picture might look ordinary. Yet, you're looking at the world's largest organism, the Armillaria ostoyae, or honey mushroom. You can find the largest organism on Earth in the Moller National Forest, Oregon. The mushroom covers over 1,500 hectares. Think of it as a long chain of mushrooms. Throughout its 8,650-year-long life, the honey mushroom has spread its tendrils through the soil. Now, some separate mushrooms poke out of the ground every once in a while. This fungus exists inside trees too. A study says that at least 112 trees have it. It's considered the largest organism due to the wide area it covers. Every beach needs this giant umbrella. It was made in the United Arab Emirates to celebrate the Emirates' happiness journey in 2018. The umbrella is 80 feet in diameter. Hey, how do you feel about taking a trip back in time? We're diving into the history of the Amazon forest to unravel the mystery of its lost cities. Grab your bug spray and hop on. The Amazon forest is the world's largest rainforest. The environment there can be extremely challenging for human life. Yet, the legend goes that the Amazon has been home to sprawling settlements rich in unmeasurable wealth. Could that really be true? Or is that none other than a figment of our collective imagination? The legend of El Dorado might be the myth that started this whole thing. As European explorers began their excavations in American lands back in the 1500s, word got out of an Amazonian civilization that used to paint their leader in gold as an offering to higher powers. The legend of El Hombre Dorado, aka the Golden Man, began to quickly spread around Europe. Explorers got excited at the possibility of finding an infinite amount of gold somewhere deep within the Latin American jungle. And as you can imagine, expeditions to the continent began to multiply with each passing year. It didn't take long before explorers found this civilization. They were known as the Muisca people and were located in Colombia, near Lake Gudavia. The Muisca people had a tradition of painting their leader, aka the Zipa, from head to toe in gold. In a ceremonial gesture, the Zipa would swim into the river, spreading gold dust all over the lake. For the Muisca, this was their way of acknowledging and thanking the higher powers of the universe they believed in. When European explorers heard and witnessed this practice, they were amazed. For them, gold was used solely for commercial purposes as their main currency for trade. This made them think that the Muisca people must have stacks and stacks of gold hidden somewhere in the jungle for them to use it so abundantly. Well, that's how the legend of El Dorado was born. What was once the practice of El Hombre Dorado traveled on word of mouth until it became El Dorado, a fictional city that was most likely to hide piles of gold. The hunt for this city led Europeans to spend large amounts of money to scour the Amazon forest. Unfortunately, all of their expeditions came back empty-handed. That is, if they ever came back at all. Now, jump to the beginning of the 1900s. In England, the Royal Geographic Society, a prestigious British institution, was looking for somebody willing to travel down to Latin America to trace the border between Brazil and Bolivia. More specifically, the part of the border that is nestled deep within the Amazon rainforest. One Sir Percy Fawcett was a Latin American aficionado, and he gladly volunteered to do the job. Oh, it's important to note that the Amazon forest is virtually the size of the continental USA. It sprawls across 8 countries, including Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia. And trust me, getting around is no easy feat. The jungle is covered in dense vegetation, and in addition to that, it's home to insane predators such as anaconda snakes, panthers, crocodiles, piranhas, and so on. But despite all that, Fawcett was very successful in his mapping adventure and seemed to be wanting to come back more. Back in England, Fawcett would scour diaries from other explorers hoping to learn more about the ancient Amazonian civilizations. He would read about the Incas and the Mayans and the great empires they built. He believed that if the Incas were capable of building empires that stretched over 2 million square miles, this could mean that other Amazonian civilizations could have thrived there too. During his research, Fawcett came across a report from a 16th century explorer. The report told of a city deep within the Amazon forest that held unimaginable quantities of minerals. A town that stretched for 15 miles without any space from a house to house. This report fueled Fawcett's imagination to a new extreme. From then on, he became obsessed with finding what he called the lost city of Z. Over years, Fawcett searched the Amazon forest, usually looking for stone ruins that could possibly indicate human settlements. On his later expeditions, he focused on exploring the state of Mato Grosso in central Brazil. He would travel from Europe and into the lower region of the Xingu River. The trip to the Xingu would take him around 14 days on foot. Then, he would set sail in small wooden boats accompanied by local indigenous leaders that knew the region better than anyone. How he communicated with the indigenous population is still a mystery, since they only spoke in local dialects. Some scientists believe that this could have been the real reason why he never found the city. They believed he wasn't able to communicate what exactly he was looking for. And this was not his greatest difficulty. As we've said before, Amazon is not a kind place for its visitors. In his diaries, Fawcett tells of encounters with a 60-foot-long anaconda, which he bravely survived. He writes of endless sleepless nights and waking up with his hands and feet swollen from mosquito bites. Some of his peers said he was invincible and tireless, but the day came during his 8th expedition when he didn't make it back home. Fawcett disappeared without leaving any trace behind. Some even suspect that he was close to reaching his lifelong goal. On the day of his disappearance, he sent an optimistic letter to his wife saying there was nothing to fear, and that he was setting out on a certain final search. Fawcett's failed attempt to find ruins seemed to support what had become a consensus among experts at the time, that this rainforest was too inhospitable to support large, complex societies, let alone cities. Experts were convinced that the Amazon's lost cities were nothing more than fiction. That is, until the 1960s, when modern research began to find evidence that suggested otherwise. Scientists discovered patches of extremely fertile soil. They called it Black Earth. And apparently, they found lots of it in the Amazon, especially alongside rivers. Further research even showed that such soil was created by human waste or the intentional burning of forests, which adds nutrients to the soil below, which could only mean bingo! The discovery of Black Earth was the evidence that large-scale agriculture was possible and probably did exist amidst the Amazon, confirming that settlements could have formed there after all. In the 1990s, along the Xingu River in Brazil, a team of archaeologists from the University of Florida made a remarkable discovery. Working alongside local indigenous people, they found very long ditches. After mapping them, they realized that these ditches were a sign of a big settlement. They were remnants of carefully designed walls centered around a plaza. Some were roads that led to more settlements. In fact, just this part of the Amazon, about the size of New Jersey, was once a network of dozens of settlements that experts believe could have been home to at least 50,000 people between 1250 and 1650 CE. Other discoveries were possible thanks to LiDAR imaging, a type of technology that allows researchers to take satellite pictures of the forest's ground without having to step inside of it. A network of trenches in Acre, Brazil, dates back to 200 to 1200 CE. These suggest settlements that could have supported 60,000 people. Other images from near the Xingu River suggest cities that could have housed about 50 million people. These were the lost cities of the Amazon. Believe it or not, these images suggest that Fawcett was very close to a major discovery. He was looking for the ruins in the right place, but he was looking for the wrong thing. Unlike cities such as Cusco, which used stone as their primary material, Amazonian settlements used wood and earth to build their cities. These materials are highly deteriorating and probably decomposed over time. Finding them required a bit more technology than what Fawcett had available at his time. No matter what happens, don't stop! We almost got it! Two treasure seekers are digging frozen ground in a cornfield at night. It's raining hard, lightning is flashing, but these two guys keep working. And now the shovel hits something solid. No way! A treasure chest! They start digging faster and find a piece of a ship's engine. What the? Far from the seas and lakes, somewhere under the fields of Kansas City, they found a giant sunken ship. How is this possible? Now you'll see. Some people spend their lives searching for shipwrecks with treasures underground. One of them is explorer David Hawley. He's been looking for such ships far from the seas, rivers, and oceans for many years. He does this because he likes the feeling of adventure. The holds of these ships may contain chests of gold, antiques, and artifacts, and you can get a lot of money for them. David says you don't have to go into the ocean to find a sunken ship. They may be lying in your backyard. But why do ships end up buried underground among fields, farms, and plains? Let's find out using the example of steamboat Great White Arabia. According to old records, the newspaper clippings, this ship had been carrying about 200 tons of treasure before it sank in 1856. Many rumors and local legends said the ship was lying underground, a few miles northeast of Kansas City. It was there because people deliberately altered the riverbed and channels of the Missouri River in the second half of the 19th century. They artificially brought the shores closer to each other. They narrowed the river to increase the flow's speed, so boats could sail much faster. In the 19th century, steamboats were the most popular means of transporting passengers and goods. Before railroads, they extended the western border across the Mississippi and Missouri rivers and brought supplies to people. That's why it was so important to increase the speed of their movement. So, on September 5, 1856, Arabia was sailing along such an estuary. It came across a snag sticking out of the water. A piece of log quickly flooded the ship. Fortunately, all passengers were evacuated. But the steamer and its precious cargo reached the silt bottom of the Missouri River in a few minutes. Several years had passed. Everyone forgot about the vessel. During this time, the course of the Missouri River had changed. But Arabia remained under the wet, muddy bottom. The soil level above it was getting higher, and the ground was losing moisture. Eventually, many decades later, a cornfield formed above the sunken ship. In the 1980s, one farmer owned this area, and he had no idea what was hidden in his territory. David Hawley carefully studied the history of the sunken ships of the USA. He knew that hundreds of steamers had gone underwater all over Missouri, but most of all, he was interested in Arabia, as there were rumors that it was filled with gold and other valuable things. The territory of cornfields in Kansas was vast, but David Hawley knew how to search properly. In 1987, he started working. First, together with his brother and father, they collected all the clippings from old newspapers they could find. They were looking not only for information about the steamer, but also for maps of the Missouri River. They tracked its historical changes, checked the dates, and identified a large area where the steamer sank. Next, they used electromagnetic testing and other geological stuff to study the soil and find the right place. They searched for differences in ground moisture and density. Then, they went through the territory with powerful metal detectors. And so, by the fall of 1988, they had determined the location of the steamer. Arabia was the size of a football field. This gigantic vessel lay 45 feet underground, 4 stories down. But before they started excavating, they had to ask the owner of the cornfield for permission. For the farmer, this news was a big surprise. He agreed on the condition that the excavations would be completed by spring so that he could sow a new crop. Digging a giant ship in winter is much more difficult and expensive than at other times. It includes additional equipment, electricity, and heating costs. The team worked day and night. They financed the excavations out of their own pocket. Each invested more than $10,000 and took out a bank loan. Finally, they noticed the first details of the ship. The shovels hit the huge engine boilers and the deck. The goal had been achieved. Most of the cargo lying inside the sunken ships is covered with rust, shells, mud, and is badly damaged. The contents of Arabia were in excellent condition, considering that the ship had sunk 130 years prior. Unfortunately, they didn't find the chests of gold. Still, they got several tons of other valuable cargo, household items of people who lived in the middle of the 19th century. It was a time capsule. The ship was carrying supplies for hundreds and thousands of people, and all these things were perfectly preserved. For example, they could clearly see the brand stamp Goodyear Rubber Company on one rubber shoe. The longer the excavations continued, the more things David and his team found. In the barrels, they found plates from the 19th century. They were intact and usable. Also, there were clean clothes, thousands of pairs of shoes, harpoons, frying pans, and umbrellas. The ship was carrying cargo to supply about 16 small towns. Yes, it's not gold, but such artifacts are also precious. The contents of the ship could be worth millions. However, the crew wasn't going to sell these things. They made a museum on the site of a former fruit market in Kansas City. If you go there, you will immediately feel like you're in a department store of the 19th century. There are thousands of items in good condition. Even the matches here are dry enough to light up. It took David many years to present the entire collection from the steamship. He values each of the items and doesn't want to sell them. Anyone can come here, pay for a ticket, and find themselves in the past. Who knows, maybe there's an old ship hidden in your backyard too. Geologists found an older vessel in the hot desert of Namibia in 2008. This ship sailed back in the days when pirates scared sailors on the seas, and now it's inside a dried-up lagoon. The ship sailed from Lisbon in 1533 and disappeared with the crew near a small diamond mining town. After almost 500 years, the hull had been badly damaged. Only the carcass of the ship remained, but the treasure hidden inside the vessel stayed intact. They carefully studied the boat for a long time, trying not to ruin anything. And then, 5 days later, they found a big old chest in the hold. Carefully opening it, they found gold coins there. Thus, the cost of the ship was estimated at about $10 million. The exact cause of the shipwreck is unknown, but experts believe the ship was destroyed by heavy cargo and bad weather. It went to the bottom of a lagoon that later became a desert. Some find an airplane in their backyard, others discover a ship, and one man found a passage to an ancient secret city in his house. This happened in Turkey in 1963. The owners of the building decided to make repairs. He went to his basement and knocked down the wall to turn this place into a living room. And so, behind one wall, he found a tunnel leading underground. The man thought it was some kind of a secret chamber. He went down there and realized it was something much more than that. It was an ancient city 18 floors deep. People built it in the years 780 to 1180 as a refuge from weather disasters and the invasion of enemies. This place also includes many underground tunnels that stretch for several miles in different directions. People could get to the town from different points using secret passages leading to these roads. The city can accommodate about 20,000 residents, livestock, and tons of food supplies. Archaeologists have also found a chapel, schools, stables, and public kitchens there.
Imagine discovering an ancient city without leaving the comfort of your home. In 1963, a man in the Nevşehir province of Turkey did exactly that. He was renovating his house. He knocked down a wall in his basement and found a mysterious room. He continued digging and saw a tunnel. This is how Derinkuyu Underground City was found. Derinkuyu is one of the deepest multi-level underground settlements of Cappadocia and in all of Turkey. This engineering masterpiece has 8 levels. The inhabitants living on those floors had access to cellars, storage areas, chapels, a school, a study room, and other structures. All floors are connected by an extensive network of tunnels. It's believed that the underground city was built as a shelter. You can't see the construction from the outside. Its depth is approximately 279 feet. The complex was large enough to shelter about 20,000 people, plus their livestock and food supplies. There's also a 180-foot ventilation shaft. People used it both for ventilation and as a well. The well supplied water both to the villagers living on the surface and to those hiding in the underground city. Interestingly, those living on the bottom levels were able to cut off the water supply for the upper and ground levels. This kept the water safe from potential poisoning. The place was designed for protection. The tunnels could be blocked from the inside with huge round rolling stone doors. The passageways were extremely narrow. Potential invaders had to enter the tunnels one at a time. Seems like they thought of everything in the 7th century BCE. Archaeologists believed the Phrygians were the ones who first built the levels. After them, the structure was used and enhanced in Roman times. This was when the chapels were added. The golden time of Derinkuyu, however, was during the Byzantine era. But how did these people manage to create such tunnels? Well, the rock they carved them into wasn't usual. It was soft volcanic rock. It appeared due to a geological process that began millions of years ago. Volcanic eruptions covered the area in thick ash. It then solidified into this soft rock. When the natural forces of wind and water eroded softer parts, only hard elements remained. Fun fact: fairy chimneys are also made of intricately shaped volcanic soft rock, but they formed naturally without any human intervention. I'm still in Turkey, but this time, my destination is Çanakkale, where a myth came to life. For 3,000 years, people believed that Homer's Iliad was fiction and that Troy never existed. In 1863, everything changed. Expatriate Frank Calvert discovered ancient ruins in western Turkey. He was convinced they belonged to the ancient city of Troy. Heinrich Schliemann examined this area in 1868. That's when Troy saw sunlight again after all those centuries. Troy has complex layers. Over the years, 9 ancient cities were built on top of one another. Historians say that the area was strategically located between Europe and Asia, so it became a prosperous trade and cultural center. This strategic position made Troy attractive throughout history. After the Trojan conflict, the city was abandoned between the years 1100 to 700 BCE. Then Greek settlers rediscovered the area, and Alexander the Great ruled there. The Romans then invaded the city. Speaking of this event, the first thing you would see when visiting the site is a replica of the wooden Trojan horse from a movie shot in 2004. The next stop is Lothal. In the 1950s, Lothal and several other Harappan sites were discovered in India. These new provinces extended the boundaries of the Indus Valley civilization. Lothal was an important part of the Harappan civilization. It had vast cotton and rice fields. Plus, it had a bead-making factory. Beads were made from semi-precious stones, like agate. Many of these beads were later found in Mesopotamia, which serves as evidence that Lothal was a thriving trading port. Archaeologists believe that the city was part of an ancient trade route. Traces of agriculture? Check. Traces of trade? Check. What else? The remains of residential buildings, streets, bathing pavements, and drains. Some real city planning, and impressive examples of early urbanization. The town was well constructed. There were modern houses. Some of them had 6 rooms, bathrooms, a large courtyard, and even a veranda. Lothal also had the world's oldest known dock. It linked the city with the Sabarmati River and the trade route. The ancient Mayan city of Calakmul is located in southern Mexico in the tropical forest of the Tierras Bajas. From 500 CE to 800 CE, Calakmul was home to over 50,000 people. There was a central plaza surrounded by outer districts. And if we count both the inhabitants of all those outer areas and those who lived in the center, Calakmul had a population of more than 1.5 million people. It was a city that was habitable for 12 centuries. It's believed that the place had more constructions than any other excavated Maya settlements in the region. After 1000 CE, the Maya civilization there faced a downfall. The settlement that was once the center of Mesoamerica was almost completely abandoned. The ancient city was at the heart of the second largest tropical forest in America. The site is well preserved, so today, if you were to visit it, you would be able to picture what life looked like in ancient Mayan times. The city remains include architectural complexes and sculpted monuments, defensive systems, quarries, water management features, agricultural terraces, massive temple pyramids, and palaces. not to mention a variety of body ornaments and other accompanying objects. It proves that complex, state-organized societies lived in this tropical forest. The Mayans depicted nature in their paintings, pottery, sculptures, rituals, and even food. I'm moving on to a place people thought didn't really exist. The city of Thonis Heracleion appeared only in a few inscriptions and ancient texts. Turns out, it was waiting to be discovered for thousands of years. Scientists searched the majority of the coast of Egypt. But then, archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team detected a colossal face looking at them from under the water. The ancient city of Heracleion was discovered completely submerged 4 miles off Alexandria's coast. In the ruins of the lost city, there were 64 ships, 700 anchors, and a treasure trove of gold coins. Archaeologists consider a 16-foot-tall statue and the temple remains the most important findings discovered by the expedition. Back then, the city had ceremonies and celebrations that took place in the Temple of Amun. The ruins and artifacts were made from granite and diorite, so they were in good condition even after having been in contact with water for centuries. They give people a glimpse into what life was like 2,300 years ago in one of the most important trade ports of the world. The city had a network of canals. You can think of it as an ancient Egyptian Venice. The canals linked many separate harbors and anchorages. Towers, temples, houses, and other structures were also linked by bridges. Thonis Heracleion was the country's main port for international trade and the collection of taxes. No one really knows how the city ended up submerged, but archaeologists connect it with natural causes. At the end of the 2nd century BCE, most probably after a flood, Heracleion got covered with water. Then, Alexandria, the city founded by Alexander the Great, became more glorious than Heracleion. Before Alexandria's fame, Heracleion was the main port of entry to Egypt. So, after the disaster, many ships heading for Heracleion had to change their route and go to Alexandria. Heracleion lost its glory until its rediscovery in 1933. Mesa Verde is an American national park in Colorado. The park is the largest archaeological preserve in the U.S., with more than 5,000 sites, including 600 cliff dwellings. Mesa Verde means green table in Spanish. The name comes from the shape of the mountains in the area, with flat tops and steep sides. The park is an ancestral Puebloan archaeological site. Starting from 7500 BCE, a group of nomadic Paleo-Indians seasonally lived in Mesa Verde. They were hunters, gatherers, and crop farmers. They built the first pueblos in the region. By the end of the 12th century, the Mesa Verdeans began constructing massive cliff dwellings, which are now the best-known structures in the park.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.